Alrighty, thanks for joining us for another Mixed Mental Arts chat. This week, we're going to talk all things video game. Um, we're just going to have a general discussion around them in general, as well as maybe discussing some of our favorites. But here joining us today is me, myself, the woke centrist. We have Hunter Maats, who's coming out of the nerd closet today.
It's true,
We also
guys. I'm a nerd.
we also have Izzy A, who actually gave me the idea to run one based off of video games.
Woohoo!
And then we got Andrew. Say what's up.
What's up?
All right. To start off the conversation, I was just brewing some things in my head and just kind of thinking about the pros and cons of games.
I could.
I'm just going to start
off
off
to say on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna start off by saying there are pros, but the pros are is you learn based off of trial and error, which is I think very important, and it also teaches you that you learn from failure. So you don't really learn from winning at a video game. You learn from losing repeatedly, and then adapting a strategy based on loss. But as far as cons, I would say there are diminishing returns in the learning potential. People who play all day may not get the initial benefits they did from when they first started. I would say it's very important to play across genres and game types that you find that you're very, crappy in. Like if you're just playing a game you're really good at and you just play it over and over, I really don't see a huge benefit in doing that. So it's just really good to play different types of games to kind of stretch those muscles. It's just like learning anything. Learning anything in the beginning is probably the best way to learn things, because once you're like way up there in the echelon, the returns of what you're learning cognitively diminishes quite a bit. But yeah, Hunter, what do you got to say about it?
Well, I think that, everything that you just said pretty much applies to everything, right? Like if you're learning an academic discipline, you can fall down the rabbit hole of that academic discipline. But if you just keep barreling down on that one discipline, it is diminishing returns. And at a certain point, you got to mix the mental arts. And, it was the same thing. I was actually having this conversation yesterday with Brian, and he was talking about athletes who, if you really want to become a great athlete, like you don't just play one sport. Like that's not good. It's good to play lots and lots of different sports, because that's how you're really forcing the body to adapt. And developing a robust cognitive capacity to be able to handle whatever's thrown your way. So, and I mean, I think to me that speaks to games in general, right? Like there's video games, but there's sports, there's chess, there's board games, there are all of these things, and the whole point of them is that they're a microcosm or a subset or a simplified version of life. It's a very concentrated tool, sandbox where you could practice, get really good, and then apply those skills to life. But you have to make sure that there is that interplay.
Great. And Andrew, what do you have to say about the pros and cons?
Yeah, I would agree with what you were saying, Dusty, about how there can be pros to them, but they can become a con if you get addicted to them and just play them all day and don't have a life outside of that. But they're like, particularly with the pros, one thing that I wanted to talk about is how like I watched this, the Intelligence Squared debates. I watched one of those on video games not too long ago, and they were debating about like basically whether they certain types of video games can enhance certain types of cognitive skills, like how first-person shooters can help improve executive function and hand-eye coordination and executive decision-making and stuff like that. And it was really interesting because it kind of made me think about how maybe like whether those skills can be improved through video games, or whether those skills just get improved in the video games, and whether they're actually transferable to other life skills. It seems like there probably is some transfer, but I'm not sure how much there is, and there's probably a lot of individual variation, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. Thanks for that. And Izzy, what would you say are the pros and cons of games?
So I would pretty much echo what everyone here has said already. I think if you approach certain games in like a qualitative approach, like when it comes to practice, I think you'll get more out of it. So don't invest too much time into it, otherwise you'll have diminishing returns. And if you're really careful with what you do, I'm talking about like fighting games. So if you're very specific in what you're doing in the lab, so to speak, as opposed to just mindlessly losing over and over again to someone who's way better than you, then you're not gonna grow much. But if you fight someone at a similar level to you, record the gameplay, dissect it, and then invest a qualitative approach in practice mode or whatever, I think that's the quickest way for you to improve. You can translate that over to like first-person shooters and other games as well. So quality over quantity is my motto when it comes to playing competitive games.
Oh, great. Sounds like you're a really big fan of the fighting games.
And first-person shooters as well.
FPS.
Yeah.
Great. One other thing. Go ahead, Hunter.
Yeah, can I ask you three a question? Because I think you guys game more than I do. How much are the sort of lessons and metaphors of games like leveling up or anything like that helpful in terms of how you then view the world and life? And then how much do you think those metaphors fuck you up in terms of trying to make sense of the world?
Oh, I want to take this one because it happened to me recently. Well, somewhat recently. So I was playing a game called Bloodborne. If any of you are familiar with the Dark Souls series.
Yep.
And I wrote this whole like article on a certain forum, and I might relay it into Mixed Mental Arts or something, or provide a link. But the underlying lesson that I learned was this idea of overcoming struggles. It's more of a figurative approach, but overcoming hurdles and growing at the end of it. And the specific character in the game, a specific boss, made a really long-lasting impression on me. The whole game is drenched in like Lovecraftian influences, and it has this like dark, dreary, gothic atmosphere to it. So it's the type of game that'll really suck you in. And I don't think it's personally that hard, but I do hear from a general impression that it's quite a difficult game to get used to. But I think that's what makes it so appealing, that when you initially start in this journey, it's gruesome and painful and weary, but by the end of it, you've actually gotten through it all. And then you look back at yourself saying, I can't believe I managed to pull that off. Then you see other people who do crazy stuff like level 1 playthroughs, or play with a banana as a controller, some insane stuff. and it puts you in your place. And like, you think you're real great at that, and then suddenly someone just beat the final boss in Dark Souls 3 with a bunch of drums or something. And I'm like, okay then. But I think that whole message was encapsulated in a particular character. I remember Dustin was asking, who's your favorite video game character, or who's your favorite female video game character, I think, a while ago. And I said like Lady Maria. And I made an argument of like where her influences came from, and there was a lot of religious allusions. She's connected to like a Mother Mary-like figure, and the lead up to her boss stage is inside of a research facility, this patient ward, hospital, like caretaker hospital, and you're going through this bloody, drenched mess, seeing all like this nightmarish motifs, and by the time you reach to her, you're fighting this like almost malevolent yet maternal figure. And what I like about video games in particular, they don't have to explicitly tell you what they're about. They can show you because you're already in their world in like a 3D space. You can move around and investigate the environment. And I think that's what makes the medium so strong, because you can combine books, film, music, and all that together. And I think it's one of the most powerful mediums out there, or potentially powerful. But there are very few games, in my opinion, that really like are absolutely top notch. But I think it's more to do with being a very young medium at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. It is still young, and there's actually quite a bit of experimentation that's been going on, especially with independent developers pretty much stepping on the scene as of, I would say, 2010 is really where it really ramped up. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. I haven't played Bloodborne. That's just because I'm an Xbox fanboy. And unfortunately, Bloodborne is not on Xbox, but I have played all the Dark Souls games. But yeah, it's Dark Souls is definitely interesting. It doesn't just lay the story out for you. You really have to explore to find out what the story is. But one of the problems I think nowadays with games in general, especially heavily commercialized games, because if you think back in the humble beginnings where we were playing like Mario Brothers and Zelda and things like that, um, the they never held your hand through anything. You really did have to find out through trial and error on how to figure out a puzzle or use a previously learned skill to get past an obstacle. Um, I do believe that the Dark Souls series does a very, very good job at capturing that retro feel and giving the person playing the power of discovery, and making them feel really smart when they do something really simple. But as far as modern games, because there is this gravitation towards making everything accessible, they'd also have, in effect, made the games less challenging and more entertainment pieces than challenge pieces, so to speak. So many of the modern shooters aren't very difficult if you just go back a couple generations. And one of the amazing things about Dark Souls is you don't get to choose a difficulty setting. The challenge there is levied before you, and you have to overcome that challenge. These days, most games give you a setting, so you could just plop it on baby mode, not get challenged at all, and then reach an ending. And at that point, it's basically you're just like watching a movie with a little bit of gameplay in between. And I think that's kind of a bad way to approach the game space, because really games are meant to challenge the mind and to make it make you learn things, to discover. It's really a pattern recognition device. It's basically training everyone to recognize patterns. And that's what I believe really games are all about. It's just making, the designer designs a pattern, and then the player recognizes the pattern and then capitalizes off of that.
To your point, Dustin, everything that you just said could be said of education too. There's been such a desire to, like, it's this weird need, like it's so important that children be educated, and so therefore all the challenge is removed, and it's just become so spoon-fed and structured. And what ends up happening is that as a result, it's not challenging, it's not interesting, there's nothing to wrestle with. And I think that a large part of, like, people think that the reason why school is failing is because it's too hard. I think it's honestly because there's nothing to like hook you and make you feel like, fuck, I really want to figure this thing out. There's no puzzle.
Yeah, I think drawing in the interest to solve something is very important for education. That's why games really do a very good job at forcing people to learn and to overcome challenges. So there is something education, I guess, can learn from that. Let's look at how powerful this tool is. And out of all entertainment forms, it seems to be raking in the dollars. Like, it's surpassed movies at this point as far as how much revenue these things are generating. So if we can take these concepts of pulling people in, like, I remember when I was young and we had our Apple IIes, we're playing things like Oregon Trail and, Where's Carmen Sandiego. And these were very educational games. And, it let us learn a little bit more detail about things we otherwise wouldn't know. But because we were hooked up to this challenge of gameplay, these little facts and things became more interesting to us, and we became more invested in these things that they were trying to teach us, if it was regarding geography or history with the Oregon Trail. And there are many games nowadays, modern games, that do delve into history. And that some people, like, I probably learned more about Italy from playing Assassin's Creed than anything else. It's like you spend 3 games in Italy, fighting the different families in charge and the Pope, and you see all this, how the religious, like how the Pope is basically a state and has control over everything. And they have all the representations of like the famous structures in Rome at a specific time period. And whenever you visit these structures, they give you like a little rundown of, what was going on, why it was built. So there are games that do a good job. I wouldn't say Assassin's Creed so much because there's a lot of fiction in it, but just, giving me interest in that world, just that game itself. I was looking at History on Fire, and Daniele Bollelli has a lot of different topics based off of, the Italians and, like Caravaggio and the slave revolt in Rome. So like all of these things I had some precursor to them from playing these games, and that kind of made me more interested in that history, so to speak.
I 100% agree with that, because like one of the reasons why I got into gaming in the first place was to play Call of Duty back when it was the World War II games. And I had like Call of Duty Big Red 1, and that was just an amazing fucking first person shooter, and it was super fun. And it's the same like you were talking about before with the movies, like it dovetails into the movies as well. And I know video games are making more than movies nowadays, but like back in the day, I used to play GoldenEye all the time. So
Yep.
I mean, they it's a whole confluence of different mediums through which people can enjoy stories, enjoy the philosophy within the stories, and enjoy the history that goes along with the storytelling.
Yeah, totally. Actually, let me just tell a really quick GoldenEye story.
Sorry.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
When we played, I was not allowed to use proximity mines at all. If I got them, everyone would quit the game. And that was basically because I memorized every spawn point, and I knew which ones got triggered at which time. So basically, if I got proximity mines, then nobody would be able to spawn, and I'd basically just win the game by spawn killing everybody with a mine.
Yeah. Fucking GoldenEye. You like there's the no odd job rule either. You can't
Oh
do
yeah,
odd
yeah. I
job.
wasn't allowed to use odd job either.
Oh yeah. No screen looking, that's another one. Turning off radar, that's another one.
Dude, we were so crazy that we taped a piece of cardboard to the damn screen so that we can look at other people's screens.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, dude.
we taped this piece of cardboard across like one person can watch the top of the screen, one person watches the bottom, but we have cardboard blinder so that nobody could watch each other's screens.
Yeah, so it's hella funny because that's something that we had to do for like Gran Turismo too, because this is what I would do to my brother, right? So we'd be racing and he'd get to like a difficult corner and I'd give him a little nudge just to throw off his concentration and he'd crash into the wall.
Yeah, I'd say video games definitely it channeled my trollishness into a virtual world where it didn't manifest itself in the real world, which is a good thing, as I was like a real life troll. I did a lot of trolly things as a kid, but trolling was my favorite thing to do in those competitive games. Like for instance, there was a game called Conquer Live and Reloaded. It was a Xbox release of Conquer's Bad Fur Day, but it did have a multiplayer element. There was this grenade in this game that completely stunned you. So what it would do is completely immobilize you and you could not move. So one time I figured out that if an enemy got close to a restocking station, and all I could do is just put them out for the whole game by repeatedly throwing these grenades at them and restocking. So that would just like really piss them off because they couldn't really do anything. So they're just stuck in a haze of stun grenade for the whole game, and it wasn't a remote area where no one runs by. So it'd be maybe 2 to 3 minutes before someone would kill them.
Jeez. The funs of online multiplayers.
Yeah. I want to disagree with one aspect of your point of what video games are supposed to be for, Dusty. That's a really interesting perspective about how, like you were saying, that they should instruct us and stuff like that, basically, and that how when you like today they're a lot easier and they're easier than they used to be, so they're more form of entertainment in some ways than they used to be. To me, it seems like that's a good goal, but it depends on what type of goal you want to have. Like if you have the goal of just looking at it as entertainment, especially if you're not a serious gamer or something like that, that might be a better goal to have. And the entertainment aspect of it, like, is more to me seems like more of the mindset that we could apply to education rather than more of the pragmatic perspective of it.
It's at this point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's at this point that I get to share my favorite quote of all time from Marshall McLuhan, which is, anyone who thinks there's a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either. They're entirely the same process. Entertainment hooks your attention, like it draws you into a world. And then, education is really about leading people out of themselves, where you then have fallen so far down that rabbit hole that you're just wrestling with unpacking the problem and then learning the lessons contained within it. So if you think about that in the context of a novel, you're like, oh my God, I can't wait to read the next Hunger Games because, I mean, you could even the full adoption curve, right? You watch the Hunger Games movie trailer. You're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Jennifer Lawrence is in it. Like, it's all my favorite actors. And then you go and you watch the movie and then you love that. And then you're like, man, I want to read the books. And then you fall down that rabbit hole and you read the books and you unpack it. And although you're reading for the entertainment and all of that, you're learning whatever life lessons. And then, you become such a fan of Suzanne Collins that you read all of her stuff. and then you want to know what our sources were, and then you go and you read 1984, and that's really what the process of learning is supposed to be about. Is that your attention gets hooked, you get obsessed with something, you fall down the rabbit hole, and you're educated. So it's a full process, and the problem is that a lot of education is never hooks our attention. So what ends up happening is that even though there's real meat and value there, we never get drawn into that world. And if you listen to the sort of process that Dustin is talking about, he gets hooked by Assassin's Creed, which makes him interested in Italy. And then from there, it's not that Assassin's Creed is accurate or, hasn't made a bunch of shit up, but then it makes him want to know what is true. So he goes and listens to History on Fire. And then, his experience and knowledge of that bit of history can deepen and deepen and deepen.
Well, and to go along with that, like I got somehow, some way, I got super into cars, and Gran Turismo is my favorite game of all time because it's the most reflective of what cars are like. Like you can customize things down to port and polishing cylinder heads. So that amount of detail within the driving simulator game got me into learning more about engineering in cars and metallurgy and aerodynamics and all that shit. To the point where like I can rebuild a suspension on old cars that I have. Like it transfers. The skills that you learn in video games transfer to real life in a lot of ways. And like guitar as well. I started off playing guitar in Guitar Hero, and me and Dusty have talked about this as well. He has a AA in music that he got because he started playing Guitar Hero.
Yep. Guitar Hero got me. Well, it didn't get me into music. It got me into performing. Like I was never considered myself as a performing musician. So I would create music, but it would be done at a computer in front of a screen and chopping things together. I just wanted to really learn more about how to play an actual instrument in front of someone. And Guitar Hero made it seem like, oh, maybe I can actually do something like this. So I bought a guitar and I was like, oh, I really need some instruction. So I went to school and I got instruction for it and learned how to sight read and sing, and it just led me down like a pretty interesting path.
Yeah, 100%. Like I did almost the exact same thing, except for in the middle of my learning actual music career, I joined the Air Force. But yeah, so it goes.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, I think it was Tekken 4. So
It made you want to learn Taekwondo?
no, not Taekwondo. So I was learning K1 kickboxing around that time, and I think it stemmed out from one of the main characters had a complete moveset overhaul because of the storyline, and everyone was wondering, or I was wondering, like, what was this new martial arts style that Jin is using? And then I heard about Kyokushin karate, or K1 Kyokushin, and it led me down to a rabbit hole, and I ended up finding out that it's pretty much like the father of all MMA in a way, and it kind of secured my confidence in sticking with Muay Thai because it was vaguely, well, not vaguely, like it was pretty well connected to Kyokushin as well, and I love the.
If you stuck with Muay Thai, wouldn't that be Baek?
No, Baek is Taekwondo as well. Muay Thai would be Bruce Irvin.
Oh yeah, that's right. He does those weird clinch things, right?
Fucking nerds.
Yeah. And what I loved about in Tekken 4, there was like really tiny little details, like the narrator remarked that Jin was training in Brisbane, Australia, and this was around, I want to say mid 2000s, and lo and behold, one of the best Kyokushin trainers in the world happened to be a trainer in Brisbane, Australia. I forgot his name.
Awesome.
I have it written down somewhere. but they went all out with a little nitty gritty, mixing the real world with its grounded fantasy.
Wow. I have kind of a similar story, but this is a really old game. Are you familiar with Virtua Fighter 2?
Yes.
Virtua Fighter influence.
Okay,
Love
so
Virtua Fighter. Virtua Fighter is my favorite fighting game. Like Virtua Fighter and Soul Calibur are my two favorite fighting games.
I love Soul Calibur, but I played that game religiously because I actually got a Sega Saturn because like one of the rich kids at my school was hungry and he traded his Sega Saturn for my Subway sandwich. I said, "Sweet, that's a good trade."
What the fuck?
Yeah,
But it was a foot long sandwich, right? It wasn't one of the 6
yeah, it was a
inch
foot long. I was
Oh,
like,
so it was a totally good trade, right?
yeah, it was like a Sega Saturn with like 5 games. I was like, yeah, certainly I'll trade you my sandwich for your Sega Saturn. No, I was actually borrowing it for like a week or two, and he's like, "Yeah, just give me your sandwich and you can have it." I was like, "Sweet." So anyway, I got obsessed with Virtua Fighter 2. So did like all my friends would come over and fight each other, et cetera, et cetera. And my favorite character was like Leon, and he was a praying mantis like type dude. And
Oh
then
yeah,
like,
Capoeira. Or
no, he's praying mantis.
No, who was the Capoeira guy in Virtua Fighter? Fuck, I can't remember his name.
Is it DJ? No, that's not his name, is it?
No,
I'll
I
look
know
it
who
up.
you're talking about. It's Jamaican guy's Jeffrey, but he's not Capoeira. He's like
It's Jeffrey. He's not Jamaican. He's Brazilian, and it is Capoeira because he
No,
does
it's
the
called
fox step.
Pancratium. That's the name of
No,
his.
no, that's a different guy.
I was thinking
Jeffrey.
of Spider.
Jeffrey is
Okay.
Pancratium or
No,
Valetudo.
Ballet Tudo. Yeah. Hold on, wait. I'm bringing it up. Jamie.
Well, anyway,
Jamie, look that up.
anyway, Leon, the praying mantis guy. Like after playing that game, I actually got into martial arts and studied praying mantis from an instructor for like 6 weeks, and he had us doing like some really hardcore. No, it was more like 6 months. He had us doing like some stupid, like super hardcore stuff that kids really shouldn't be doing, like punching into like a sack of rocks or pebbles for like 10 minutes. Just like really hard stuff that like crazy Chinese people would do. But it was a really interesting experience. We like learned I guess what they call like, it's not katas, they're called something else, but we learned like a few of those and then learned some stances and some finger locks and some other crazy stuff, but it was really fun.
What style did you study?
It was Southern Praying Mantis, 7-star.
Oh, so like straight up kung fu.
Yeah, there's 2 Praying Mantis styles. There's Northern and Southern, and he was teaching Southern.
What's kung fu?
Kung fu
Chinese
is
martial arts.
It's kung fu. Kung fu is the Cantonese way of saying it. Kung fu is the Mandarin way of saying it. And
Okay.
Michael Dunn, our loyal Michael Dunn, who's in every fucking chat, just said who I was thinking of was Eddie from Tekken. And
Yep.
yes, it was Eddie from Tekken. Thank you.
That's racist. I'm joking.
No, everybody hated Eddie because all you had to do was button mash at the arcade, and you'd basically be able to beat anybody.
Well,
At the like very
that's
lower
fighting
level.
game 101 is button mash, no 2 combos, and you'll win every fight.
No, I heavily disagree. That's the quickest way to get demolished by a competent fighter.
That's not true.
It is true. I've done it over and over again. Because when you only rehearse like 1 or 2 move sets, it's very easy to predict it and then punish accordingly.
It depends on what game too. Like Marvel versus
Punish
Capcom.
accordingly.
Yeah, that's what
that's
you
what
do.
it's called. That's what it's called, punishment. So if someone does a bad move, you punish them. That's what it's called.
That's fighting game lingo.
Isaiah, is that show Kung Fu called Gong Fu in China or something like that?
So linguist lesson of the day. So the characters are the same regardless of what dialect or language you're speaking. In Japanese, they would be the same kanji. It's gong fu is the pronunciation in Mandarin, but the show Kung Fu is Kung Fu because that's the transliteration that was used. Also, in the old style of transliteration, which is the Wade Giles form of transliteration, it's going to be the G's are K's and the U's or the O's in modern pinyin are U's. So it's kind of weird. But yes, Gong Fu, Kung Fu, same thing.
That reminded me of something. I think video games are best at doing this, but when it comes to like very nuanced things, so Jin is doing Kyokushin karate, and the other Mishimas, Hachi and Kazuya, in-game lore is called Mishima Ryu, but the real life equivalent, I think it's Shotokan.
Yes.
And I think that's known for being like a very harsh and like brutal fighting style.
So
and
yeah.
It matches their characters. Like Kazuya and Heihachi are like very brutal, malevolent figures. Jin is more of a serene kind of. He holds back when he's basically not a wild killer until Tekken 6, but I don't want to remember that.
Dude, so much of what I love about video games is that the premier video games are all written in Japan. Like all the video games that I love are from Japanese studios. Like Tekken, like Virtua Fighter, like Zelda, like Gran Turismo,
Metal Gear, Bloodborne, Dark Souls, like a lot of good stuff.
Real, or any of the Square Enix stuff.
Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts,
yeah, and even like DDR, their concept of engineering a game is so much more integrated than like something like Madden. Like EA Sports, like I don't think I've ever played something from EA that gives me the same kind of experience that I would have playing Gran Turismo from Polyphony Digital, which is a Japanese.
I don't think EA has a good. The only thing they
like
have
from an
is
anecdotal
Need for Speed, I believe. And it's not really a simulator.
Well, I know it's not a simulator, but the idea is the same within Madden and Gran Turismo. The idea is to give you the experience of being in that sport, and motorsports are sports.
Well, I never liked really sports games, and that's just because I'd rather play the sport if I was interested than play a analogous form of it. I understand maybe getting interested, like the whole martial arts thing, but I was already playing football, so I really wasn't wanting to play a football video game.
I mean, but so you do learn things from playing sports video games, like because so much of the animation within those video games is very reflective of what the proper technique for doing these physical motions are in real life.
Well, I'd say you'd learn more if you were a defensive or offensive coordinator, but as an actual player, I don't think it translates as much.
I think it depends on your mindset, because like I played linebacker when I played football, and basically because of how I thought about things, the way that my brain works, understanding packages and plays and systems and formations from playing Madden helped me understand how to move in space better.
Maybe I probably would have benefited if there was like a POV mode, like from the player, because just like looking on the field and checking things it's a lot different from like seeing something from overhead.
Well, no, I definitely agree with you, because when I play Gran Turismo, I play from POV mode, but like other racing games, I would like to play from a backed out mode. By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet. I came late. And this is the one time when coming after everyone else is not a good thing. My name's Isaiah. If you've watched an MMA chat before, you've seen me. I'm the alcoholic, chain smoking asshole who talks over everybody. But anyway, I'm gonna take a break from talking for the moment.
All right. I think I just want to loop back, and I think Hunter was right where, education and entertainment is basically the same. And one of the things I want to say too is an educator and a game developer are actually one and the same, because like I say, from a designer's perspective, a designer, your job is to give the tools that a player needs to overcome their challenges, and also to teach them in not so obvious ways on how to overcome those challenges. So as a game designer yourself, you're actually trying to educate the person that's playing the game about how to overcome a challenge.
And just to build off of what Dusty's saying, like curriculum design is very much the same thing. Like, the first unit in a curriculum is level 1. Like, what is the thing that we're giving you that's a small space where you can start to acquire the fundamental concepts that you'll need in level 2, in level 3, in level 4, until by the end of the course, you've now got such a robust toolkit that, we can throw it all at you in all sorts of different combinations, and you can handle that level of complexity and level of difficulty. But, what we're trying to do is, there's actually, I wish I knew how to share images in this. There's a great diagram on the Wikipedia page for flow, that on the bottom axis has level of challenge, and then on the top axis I think is level of skill. And essentially, if you have high skill and high challenge, then you reach flow. And I think both what game designers and educators are trying to do is trying to design things that ultimately create flow experiences at every level, at every unit.
Oh, I want to interject with this one. How many of you are familiar with Street Fighter 3's Evo Moment? I think it's Evo Moment 37.
Talking about die.
Yeah, Daigo. So
Yeah, I'm
Hunter was
very
talking
familiar
about.
with that.
Okay, so I'll just give a quick rundown because Hunter was talking about flow, and that's the first thing that popped in my mind. So in Street Fighter, there's two mechanics that I'll talk about. One is retreating or holding back is to block, but if you tap forward at the right time, you will parry your opponent. So there's a very small window, and there's basically a skill barrier for it. Now, in Evo, which is a fighting game tournament, a player called Daigo Umehara was up against another top level player called Justin Wong. And it was in the heat of the moment, final round. I don't think it was the final round, but Daigo was very low in health with his Ken player, and Justin was using Chun-Li. He had about 1/3 of a health life bar.
How low his health was. Like, his health was so low that blocking anything, because there's two types of ways you could lose health in Street Fighter. You could lose it
chip
by
damage,
not blocking, and then if you block a special attack, you also get like a little bit of damage. So
exactly. So what was happening in Daigo's scenario, his health was too low to block an incoming super, so he had no choice but to parry everything, basically make it or break it. So they're spacing each other out, and surprise, surprise, Justin whips out the super, and right there in the moment, Daigo parries every single hit from the super. The crowd is going completely insane. But not only that, he has to capitalize on the parry window and return with his own super to secure the win. Otherwise, it would have been pointless. Now, the execution barrier for that is almost near inhuman, but that's probably the best example of video game flow that I've ever seen. And that happens a lot in fighting games. I've seen many instances in Tekken where that happened as well.
Yeah, it was such a legendary moment that they actually added it to future Street Fighter games as something you can train for. Like they actually set it up. So, okay, here's a special moment from Daigo's match. Like, let's see if you can do it.
And I think Street Fighter 5, they gave back Ryu's parry as a V trigger skill. I don't know if it's fully replicable to that extent, but I think it's a nod back to Street Fighter 3.
Yes, the historical moment.
Did everybody see that diagram that Isaiah had up, the flow diagram?
Yep.
It's this one. So if you look at the flow diagram as is displayed on my screen now, it is challenge level versus skill level. So certain things have high skill levels, certain things have high challenge levels. And to get into the flow state, something has to be challenging and require a high amount of skill. Something can be a high skill level activity. Like for me, a high skill level activity is just playing chords on the guitar, right? So doing that is a relaxation technique for me, as you can see in the lower right hand quadrant of the chart. And writing a song, on the other hand, is a high challenge level activity. So if I combine playing chords on the guitar with trying to write a song, I can and have gotten into a flow state. And it's an effluent state. Like it's so hard to get into. And the same thing applies to video games. Like when I was on probably hour 65 of playing Ocarina of Time, I might have gone into flow in the water temple trying to figure out where that last key is. Because it's something that's so incredibly difficult that you can't tune your brain out. And it's something that requires enough of your body to be coordinated with that you can't, zone out and only be in your brain. And that's how you get from that automated state to an engaged state, which is somewhat analogous, or I wouldn't say somewhat analogous, it's directly analogous with what flow is.
Yeah, I agree.
And that also loops back to what Dusty was talking about, where at a certain point, if your skill level is high enough, you're chasing diminishing returns. Like you're so good that it's impossible for you to reach a level of challenge within a particular game where you can actually get better. And essentially the challenge level is so low that you're either going to, be in a state of relaxation doing it, or you might actually start to get to levels of boredom. Like at a certain point, you lose an appetite for a challenge and you need to find ways to mix it up, either by playing a new game or studying something new or deepening your knowledge of some aspect of it. But, essentially most of education is bad game design. The game is not designed well, and so you're creating a lot of states like anxiety, frustration, and things like that.
I think that's what happened with Destiny 2, because it was more of like a half sequel as opposed to a full-on real sequel. It was more like Destiny 1.5, and a lot of the mechanics from the previous entry was watered down, very streamlined, simplified, and surprise, surprise, the pro players in that game got very bored very quickly and just ended up leaving the game.
That's the curse of the modern high selling game, is that as it iterates to more sequels, the gameplay gets less challenging. And we can see this across all a lot of games series will do this. Fallout did it, Skyrim did it. A lot of these games will try to water down and make the game less challenging to appear to a wider demographic.
Yeah, that's always the. I don't want to be harsh in saying the word excuse, but that seems like that's always the reason they say. But games like Dark Souls, like speak to the contrary. Like people, there is a market for that challenge. And I remember playing like old games in a remastered version on their highest difficulty. And I had a lot more fun playing them than some of the more recent games.
Yeah, that's for sure. Like Call of Duty 2 on the highest. That's freaking
My
hard
one
ass
was
game.
BioShock 1. That was I bought the collection on PS4. It was my first time playing it. That game completely blew my mind away. And I was playing
Oh,
on the
you never
highest
played the
difficulty.
first one?
No, I did not. I missed out. Everyone was
Yeah, the
surprised.
first one.
They were all
First one's
like,
very good.
"What?" Yeah. And like I realized it was a very resource sparse. There's a scarcity on or scarcity, yeah, scarcity or whatever on resources. So I knew cranking up the difficulty is gonna make it a lot harder. But later in the game, it seemed like it got a little easier because you got more money and you could invest in more things. But that was an example of like an older game that I had a lot more fun with the challenge. And Kingdom Hearts 1 HD remix, playing that on critical mode was a lot more challenging to me as opposed to playing something like Final Fantasy. And I'm specifically talking about Final Fantasy 15 because it was initially created by the same director. And going back and looking at these older games, it seemed like they were more challenging. And then the iterative entries seem to get watered down.
Yeah, it depends on the series. Like, I wouldn't say Metal Gear Solid 1 is any more harder than 5, but 5, you just have to put in more hours.
I have mixed opinions in 5. But yeah, that would be a good
Why is it?
example.
Because the key for Sutherland.
No, it's not finished.
The
In
story.
my
The
opinion,
story's too short.
yeah. Chapter 3.
No,
Oh,
they
yeah.
cut it short for sure. They released stuff after that showed that there was way more planned.
And there was a whole behind the scenes scenario with Kojima and Konami, but that's all in the past now. He's working on a new game called Death Stranding, and I like the concept that he's coming up with. So I remember Hunting was talking about Homo socialis as opposed to Homo sapiens. So Kojima was putting his own little twist to that idea called Homo ludens, creatures that play. And he goes all the way back to this whole, I think the analogy he's using is sticks and threads, or how human beings connect with each other. And there's a lot of thread motifs symbolizing connections. Mind you, this game is still early in production, and a lot of this is still weird. If you look at the game trailers, it's like, I don't know, it feels like you're on a trip or something. It's a Kojima game, so I don't know what to expect. But it definitely seems like being taken off of Metal Gear might have been a good thing in the long run. And I'm looking forward to what he comes up with in Death Stranding.
Yeah. Metal Gear is nothing. It's not going to be anything without Kojima. So he's gone. So in my view, Metal Gear is complete. It's finished.
Yeah, it's gone. Konami released Metal Gear Survive, but I'm just not interested in that at all.
No, it just looks like a zombie knockoff game.
In terms of the difficulty of games, though, it depends on the game and the person too. Though, like I was thinking about with the Grand Theft Auto games, for example. Like some people want to do the missions and stuff like that on those, but some people just want to like steal people's cars and kill hookers and shit like that.
Yeah, that's the aspect of sandboxing a game. A lot of the more modern games these days allow you to play in a sandbox, but in order to actually progress through the story of a game, you have to do the missions. But yeah, if that fancies you, just running around, slapping people around or stealing cars, there's nothing stopping you outside of the cops.
Isn't that just like life, though? Like some people want to take on the challenge
Hunter,
of like
you're comparing real life with GTA. Oh,
no, but I mean
crap.
some
Incoming ban on
people
video games because of you.
well, you know, but some people want to like take on challenges and you know, play through life that way, and some people are just trying to pursue the sort of like instant buzz of like, you know, beating up hookers and like causing mayhem.
Are they called anarchists? I don't know.
Well, you know, then I mean, it's like all of these things, right? Like what does the term anarchist even mean? Like it can show you 100 different people who would self-identify as an anarchist, so they're totally different in their ideologies.
Yeah.
Hunter, are you taking my tact with that and being like, what does this even mean, man? Like,
I think Isaiah that the Big Lebowski beat both of us to that tact. What do you even mean, man?
there are
Yeah.
rules.
Walter, what does this even have to do with Vietnam, Walter?
Yeah, I think the whole
This is
hooker
like-
baiting thing is extremely novel, and it basically like you try it once and like, oh, it's whatever.
Yeah. This is like kind of what we were talking about earlier too, in terms of like playing a lot of different games for different purposes, like, and depending on your mood too. Like maybe you feel like fucking shit up in Grand Theft Auto 1 hour, and then like a few hours later maybe you'll feel like accomplishing goals in Call of Duty or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yep, different games. For
What do you
different
think
tastes.
of artificial goals set up by the developer, like trophy systems or Xbox's point system?
That's a good. Well, they're basically designed like to keep a person playing a game. They're not. Well, there's two things. It's designed as an extra challenge that's not in the game, but it's also designed to keep a person playing. So, say if someone has these OCD like tendencies to want to get all the achievements or all the trophies, and it's like a multiplayer game. One of the reasons developers want the person playing the game is so that they don't put that game back on the market if you're a console player. Because usually, you know, once you're done with the game, some people tend to sell them. I don't. I just keep my whole collection. But it's actually part of trying to keep that disc from exchanging hands.
Yeah, like they're trying to create more incentives to keep the game, but I buy my games digitally now for the most part.
That's really interesting, Dustin. I wonder what other sort of inside the game developer studio insights do you have for us? Like, how are people in the gaming industry thinking that those of us outside might not know about?
Oh, I
Games
can
make
name
more
a few.
money off of DLC than they do from the shelf, from the game
There's also
itself.
microtransactions as well. So some of them are kind of lucrative. I'm thinking of a patent that Activision has, and I don't think they've actually implemented it, but there's this like shady tactic where new players who've bought the game, so this could potentially be in the next Call of Duty, they'll encounter players who've invested in microtransaction items. So a fancy skin for your gun, whether it's like a gold version or a tiger skin or whatever, or you'll be matched make with them more often in the hopes of tempting you to buy those items. And the only way to get them is through spending real money or creating artificial barriers in the game where it would be much quicker to pay your way through the game. So these things, like the mobile game industry is infamous for this. You'll have some games where you make a move and then you have to wait a couple of minutes, or you might have to wait an hour. Some of them go insane, like wait a day. But if you pay now, you can just skip the wait period. And I see some of that kind of tactics slowly creeping into AAA games with like loot boxes and loot crates. And I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah, I don't mind as long as it doesn't affect the actual play of the game. If it's if it's a pay to win strategy, I'm definitely against that because it puts people at a disadvantage if they're not willing to put down the dollars to get some type of in-game advantage. But if it's just a cosmetic look, oh my gun looks different. Oh my dude has a hat on. I'm not really opposed to that.
Like there are moments where it turns into an oxymoron. On the one hand, you want to be invest in the game for notable rewards, but then why bother when you can buy your way? And an extreme example is EA with Battlefront 2. Um, a lot of the famous characters were locked behind like a loot box system, and if you actually wanted to even get, never mind all of them, but if you wanted just a few handful, you'd have to invest a ridiculous amount of time in there, as opposed to your regular average games of the similar genre, like of first person shooters. Someone calculated that if you wanted every single item, the hours cranked up beyond the thousands. I think it was some crazy number. But the point I was
Yeah,
trying
I
to
think
make,
it's just a different evaluation of what time is worth.
yeah,
So if
and
like somebody's wants to get something, like they'll spend like 40 hours to get a Darth Vader or whatnot. Um, they believe it's worth that time to get the Darth Vader, but there might be people who are like, oh, that's not my time isn't worth that. Like my time is worth much more, so I'll just pay the extra to get the Darth Vader or whatnot.
and that's my issue with, like, even though it might seem cosmetic, like in this case, it's actually gameplay affecting. But even if it was something like I don't know, a tiger camo for a gun, the core game was slanted in such a way to handle these kind of microtransaction for in a negative way, in my opinion. So artificial padding, forcing players to play through irrelevant moments in the hopes of them just spending real money. And I think it's paradoxical to the whole point of playing the game for that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, I just never cared about camouflages on my guns. I just like to play the game. Like I understand some people who like to deck out their characters and like peacock in front of everybody about what camouflage they have in their gun. You know what? The only thing I cared about was my emblem, and you can customize that however you want. But the camouflages, the only ones I really cared about were challenge based ones, like get 300 headshots or something. But if it was something that anyone could buy, I really didn't care about it.
Like, yeah, I mean, I was picking like minor examples, but even with the 300 headshots, I think this is in COD 4, you would get like a gold version of the gun. But I think its meaning as in front of other players will be diminished if everyone knows, oh, he or she just bought that. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah. Instead of coming across the players, like, oh my God, you're the person who scored 300 headshots, or you're insane with this gun. It takes away, I guess, the mental game
yeah,
aspect.
that's something the industry is gonna have to figure out how they can maximize profits without diminishing the experience for the people who are playing the game.
Doesn't that connect to real life? I love that I
Of
get to be the
course.
person who keeps doing that. But like, what you're talking about is status mechanisms and how status is awarded. And, I mean, obviously there's a real problem with people being able to buy status in our society and status being awarded for stupid fucking shit. Um, so, I mean, that's just a basic problem of any human system. And I think a lot of what you guys are saying is that, if those status mechanisms get fucked up and if they're about the wrong thing, then you don't really want to buy into the system because you know that it's a stupid system, and so it's very hard to care about.
And that's part of the reason why I got out of gaming, is because everything shifted to online multiplayer. Like if I can't sit in a room with my bros and kick their ass at a fucking game, then why the hell am I playing a game in the first place? It's the only two reasons why I would play a game in the first place are, one, to hone a skill, which is why I play Gran Turismo. Two, to for a story, which is why I play Legend of Zelda. And three, to kick my friends' asses without hurting them, which is why I play shit like GoldenEye or Call of Duty or fighting games like Virtua Fighter or Tekken, is for that immediate sense of competition. So it's mind-boggling how these new systems are so popular to me, because like online multiplayer doesn't have any of the aspects that I would find attractive in a video game.
Yeah, I tend not to play too much online multiplayer anymore. Most of the stuff I play is co-op based, like cooperative based, or single player now. Like I'm too old to just jump into a Call of Duty lobby and just hear nigger being shouted like every 5 seconds and people calling each other cucks and whatnot.
Oh dear. Then
I'm just too old for
that's why I'm
that.
like really picky with the community I hang around with. But that reminds me, like online, in terms of, I think fighting games are the last few offline games where they don't need a split screen and you can play at home. Because first-person shooters are now emphasizing the entire screen resolution, and you need the entire view, blah blah blah. But yeah, online, even fighting games will never be as good as offline. And I think, yeah, fighting games might be the last bastions for that. And there's also the environment. Like, I'm not too savvy on the idea of encountering complete strangers over the mic and hearing all sorts of crazy insults. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know when I was younger, just playing a single player game and passing the controller was good enough. Like we never had to always be playing at the same time. Like back then your internet was asking your friend what they might think about how to solve a challenge. Like we couldn't go online and then look at, oh, I'm stuck here. How do I get past this? You both had, sometimes having two heads might be better than just one alone. And that's how I got through many of the early RPGs, was just, we would sit in the same room, watch the story, try to think of strategies of what to do on a boss. That's how we collaborated while playing a single player game back then.
Oh, and that also remind me, like online games do have their positives as well. I'm thinking of like MMORPGs and the positive social aspects. So having a raid team, like the usual setup that I would work with is, it used to be Destiny, but recently I just not feeling it. But I used to play Destiny and then one other multiplayer game, and that was either Tekken or Guilty Gear. And the next one might be Dragon Ball Fighters, but I'm just waiting for more DLC to come true. And so those would be like my main multiplayer games for the year.
What
And then
about Monster Hunter?
I was thinking about placement. And so while I'm playing those two as my main online games, I would go through the offline games. So on my list would be Nier Automata, Shadow of the Colossus remake, even though I've played the original, BioShock Infinite, like single player story heavy games, and basically reap the benefits of investing in a story heavy medium at your own pace, and you can adjust the challenge if you want, and also the benefits of competitive online gaming, whether it's a first person shooter or a fighting game.
Could I ask everyone a question about video games in general? I wanted to know what everyone thinks about whether violent video games tend to decrease someone's tendency towards physical violence in the real world, or increases it. Because I think that it definitely decreases it, because it can be a healthy outlet. But obviously there are lots of people who are all up in arms who have claimed for like since video games were invented that playing violent video games makes you go out and commit mass shootings like people did with the Columbine shootings and stuff like that.
I think video games are the boogeyman when it comes to stuff like this, because usually kids like those already had serious mental complications beforehand, and I don't think video games are still a young medium. If shooting up people in virtual reality is your therapy, I don't think that's a healthy alternative. I think you'd need to actually get some real help instead of even conceptualize, even thinking about murdering someone, but in a simulated fashion. But I think it's more to do with even before the video games when it comes to, I think they're just a convenient target.
Well, it's the same argument that Tipper Gore made with music back in the late 80s.
And Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Satanist cults in Texas.
And
Masturbation,
comic books.
masturbation and marijuana are going to be the death of our society.
Clearly.
And I think masturbation
no,
causes blindness.
To
Yeah, masturbation causes blindness, and I've watched Reefer Madness. I know the truth. Thanks, guys. The Bible.
Oh god. And I remember comic books are also the targets before video games. So it's basically like a running away, not wanting to solve the problems at hand, and just projection.
Well,
that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's
hashtag Puritanism.
Well, also, by the way, to go even further back, one of the major concerns that Ulysses S. Grant's parents had was that he was spending all of his time frittering it away reading novels. And so there was, back in the 1800s, when you started to have like this mass publication and printing, there was an obsession about the dangers of novels and these fantasy worlds that these children were retreating to, and how that was going to destroy our society. So it's that I mean, the idea of getting lost in a fantasy world and not paying attention to the real world has always been a concern, and clearly there are people for whom that is a real fucking issue. Like in Japan, you have the hikikomori, who are the shut-ins, who all they do is play video games and eat ramen that their parents bring them.
Yeah, if you want to see a really good anime about that, check out Welcome to the DHK.
Yes,
No,
that's amazing.
NHK.
NHK. Yeah.
Oh, NHK, my bad.
NHK Yokuso. Yes, that is fantastic.
Didn't they make like a law in Japan for that reason, that like if you're under the, are you smoking a pipe, Isaiah? That's awesome.
I am. I'm a man of wealth and taste.
But didn't they make like a law in Japan for that reason, for something like if you're under 18, you're not allowed to play video games between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. because kids are getting too addicted to them or something like that?
How on earth are they going to regulate that?
Well, so this shoehorns into East Asian culture writ large, because believe it or not, a lot of what Japanese culture is based off of Confucian ideals. Like there's this whole East Asian cultural sphere which is based on the tenets of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism overarching, right? And like within Japan specifically, there's the 4 occupations and the deference to elders, which are tenets of the Confucian social order, right? And traditionally within Japan, what young people are supposed to do is take care of the elder people. That is what filial piety is, or piety, however you want to pronounce that. And that's a Confucian trait that has been handed down over generations in Japan since the Heian era of Japan. And I mean, it's a common theme within. I mean, I'm a fucking manga and anime nerd first and foremost. Like my nerddom is can you hear me? You should be able to hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. But
Yep.
my nerddom is within anime, manga, Asian film, and music writ large, and chemistry and other engineering bullshit. But we'll get into that on a different MMA chat. But the whole milieu of East Asian culture is rooted in like different aspects of Confucianism and Taoism and Buddhism interspersed throughout daily order, right? Just in the same way that we have our as Brian Callen would say, our Judeo-Christian ethic that we have in the West, they have their Confucian Taoist ethic that they have in the East, and it's super prevalent within their storytelling and within their lawmaking as well. And in Japan, after the Meiji Restoration, they basically uploaded the civil code system in the way that they write their laws. So in the same way that in France or Spain or in Germany, they have to write a law to provision something or restrict something, in Japan it's the same way. Whereas in the United States, we have common law system, which comes from the English common law, which is a Nordic thing, which is an Anglo-Saxon remnant. But basically the way that our law system works is something happens and then we decide what to do on the back end. Whereas in the civil law system, they make a law and then decide how to deal with it on the front end. So that's the distinction there. So when Izzy was saying, how are they going to enforce that? They don't really care about enforcing it. They just want to say, we don't want this in our civil society. So we're going to make a law to do it. And I don't even know what the law is, or if it's actually accurate that there is a law saying that people under the age of 18, and because the age of majority in Japan isn't even 18, it's 20. So like, I don't know the veracity of this law, but that's besides the point. They're not going to enforce the law. Like, law enforcement is very different around the world. And Japanese culture is very focused on maintaining social order because it's part of the East Asian cultural sphere in that way. And that's my rant on that.
Well, and to build off of that in terms of enforcement being different, like the Dutch have this concept, gedogen, which means turning a blind eye, which basically means that, yeah, we have a law, but we all know we're not going to enforce it. And so, for example, marijuana laws generally fall under gedogen. There are laws, but like everybody has informally agreed that we're not going to enforce these laws.
That reminds me of the Ottoman Empire as well, with certain laws as well, but I won't go there.
Well, we should have a MMA chat just on the Ottoman Empire.
My audio skipped,
Maybe.
so I didn't hear that.
Well, more generally, I'd like to have some MMA chats on Islam and, the history of Islam and the internal struggles within Islam and all of that sort of stuff, because, I have an underpants gnome view of intellectual history.
Don't worry, I got you covered on that.
That'd be great. I like that.
Bell system is still underway, and I've got into contact with more scholars.
Love that. I'm very excited.
Video games.
Yeah, I know, right?
What was the last game that everyone's played here?
Fruit Ninja.
Did that awaken the woke centrist? What's your feeling, Dusty, in general on all these iPhone games?
They're fine. They're easily accessible, and they've gotten older people to get into certain things like Candy Crush. I can't say there's no merit behind playing it because there are some tough puzzles in those games. But I don't I don't dismay people from playing mobile games. It's just a different sphere of game playing, but you can see how widely popular they are. But there are some predators in that sphere who do prey on people, with their monetary tactics. Like a lot of free to play games are kind of weirdly designed in a way that does not benefit the player that very much.
Yeah, that's bleeding its way into console and PC games too. That's what I was talking about earlier.
Well, I think at this point it's important to mention dating sims and the world that exists now with dating sims, online. Because
I know they're a Japanese
that
thing.
world
I
is
haven't
not
really.
representative of the real world at all.
well, of course it's not representative of the real world, but the point is that dating sims are the beta test system for DLC and for microtransactions.
Well,
Like
yeah, there's a bunch of different games though,
They're
and there's some really good ones. Like
they're great. They're great if you want to sex with chicks.
it depends on what you mean by sex. Are we talking IRL or are we talking, a waifu?
What?
Yo, I didn't know you were such an otaku, Isaiah. You didn't give that impression.
My
I think-
friend, I will outlift you and also teach you about the ways of the Yamato Nadeshiko. So that is my life.
He's an otaku nerd for sure.
I have problems, but
So
we
Fruit
covered that.
Ninja, you
We
said.
covered that last week. We covered all my problems last week. This isn't the Isaiah therapy session again.
All right, Izzy, what's your last greatest play of game that you really liked?
I think it would have been Bloodborne. That's because I replayed it. There's either Bloodborne, Bioshock, or Tekken 7, competitive wise. Actually, I'll talk about them. So, a bit more on the Lady Maria boss fight in Bloodborne. I like the gradual build up because here's what I think is a prime advantage of an interactive medium. Video games aren't held back by having to explicitly proclaim what they're all about. Like I know films and books can do that too, but with the added investment of almost being in the virtual space, you can do so much more. So, for example, when I was talking about the research hall, you're not told that she was a caretaker, this boss that's coming up, Lady Maria, but you know that straight away just from going in there. You're told later, but you've already realized it. And you've seen all these patients who are going through so much agony and torment, and you're left to form your own opinion of what's going on here. And the game gives you breadcrumbs to follow up on, and it's to add more to chaos. The research hall is a vertical labyrinth that changes halfway through. So you're in a chaotic state, discovering what's going on here. And if you're playing this game at night with a pair of headphones on, and you're not over leveled, it's quite heart wrenching. And
Or play
when you find
you know what? Play what's that damn name? Silent Hill
Dark
2 at night.
no thanks. I might play Resident Evil 7, maybe. And there was this beautiful metaphor that the game brought, and I think it's only games that can do this. You spend maybe half an hour in this dark, damp, dismal research hall, frantically making your way about, trying to avoid death. And then you finally escalate this. It's almost like this Tower of Babel imagery, because there's a lot of religious symbolisms in here. And you finally make your way through this tower, and you open these two massive doors, and in comes a beam of light. And you first thing you see is a celestial tree of Eden like garden, and there's tons of gothic Lovecraftian imagery in there, a lot of Adam and Eve kind of imagery thrown in there, Mother Mary, maternal figure in there, and the overall theme of the main game is about this evolutionary transcendence through struggle beyond humanity. So it's an interesting twist with mixing evolution and religion, I think. I think that might be a stretch, but I love the idea of making your way through a dark pit and going to like this slanted ray of hope. And then that's when you start fighting the boss, and she's kind of a nightmare. Like, she's one of my favorite bosses in the game. There's so much character built up for her before you even fight her. But that was my latest and greatest experience with video games. And BioShock had a similar feeling, but I don't want to spoil it in case someone hasn't played it. But the twist about in the latter part of the game is when the game really spikes up for you.
Would you
And
kindly?
yeah, oh my God, it hurt more for me because that guy was Irish, and I'm like reminiscing back home, and I'm like, oh, I love this character. He sounds exactly like my best friend from childhood. I can trust this character. I'm kind of giving it away. I can trust this character. He's amazing, and he's what a. I guess Atlas is what was one of the most amazing characters, and that's the hint was. But then the twist that occurs is what's really gut-wrenching. And the main villain is probably one of the best video game villains out there. And it's all foreshadowed in front of your face. And if you just be a little bit more inquisitive, you'll find that I don't know if you could solve it, but it was in your face the whole time the moment another character was mentioned alongside Andrew Ryan. And
Yeah.
what I love about fighting games in particular, fighting games to me aren't really like quote unquote fighting games. It's not really a slugfest. Like, I know Isaiah was making a remark about button mashing, but in the competitive scene, at high level play, you're not going to stand a chance one bit. It's more like a war game. And I know that sounds a little crazy to say, but when you're spacing each other's out and you're accounting for your moveset, your army, so to say, your tools, so your weapons to use, knowing when to capitalize, when to fighting game lingo punish, and you're basically getting into your opponent's head without letting them get into yours. It's mental warfare, and I think fighting games, that's their strongest point. I think it's in Japanese, but in Tekken lingo it's called Yomi, which is basically the mental warfare, and that's what I think is Tekken's strongest element. Virtua Fighter does this. Guilty Gear is really good at it. Fighting games in general, really good at it. But I think Virtua Fighter might be the best at it, and Tekken following suit.
In refutation to what you just said, I don't think that fighting games are simulations of war in the same way that you stated them to be. Like, fighting games are single combat, which isn't the same as war. It's more like a duel. Whereas something like the old Call of Duties or like the newer Battlefields are more akin to the war environment, or even like Civilization, Civ 5, Civ 6, whatever iteration of Civilization you want to harken on, those are more akin to what the considerations of war are, whereas single combat is more either sport orientated or duel orientated, which is a completely different mindset than a war orientation. And as far as the button mashing, I was kind of being flippant there. Like, nobody who plays more than 20 hours of a fighting game is only going to be a button masher. That's just not going to happen, because then you learn the patterns. Whether or not you know the patterns, you learn them anyway. So
Okay, so that's a fair way to say a duel as opposed to a war. But the vague metaphorical comparisons I was making was, think of the various moves you have as your tool sets or your quote unquote soldiers, so to speak. and the various frame data that you need to know. The grand scheme of things, you're fighting the player. I know he's like a single entity, but the multifaceted dimension, like the quote-unquote army that I'm making vague connection to, is the move set and their patterns and their play styles. So it's not necessarily just because you're fighting these people, sometimes the same person over and over again. Sometimes you're fighting with multiple characters switching around too. That's why I made like the vague reference to war. More so like the art of war instead of the explicit sense.
It's more like the book. It's more like the Book of Five Rings than it is the Art of War. Because the Book of Five Rings is the same concepts of the Art of War, but applied to the individual.
I think a duo would be a better comparison. I think duo works better.
I think one of the largest themes that sort of is coming through in this conversation is how well does the game translate to whatever real world experience it's trying to capture. And, you know, the Duke of Wellington famously said that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. So he certainly felt that soccer and rugby translated to the battlefield of his time. But I think that question of how well do any of these things translate is sort of the big question.
Yes, I mean, so much. I'm working on a paper right now regarding how to apply the concepts within the Art of War and the 36 stratagems to basically interpersonal conflict resolution and individual, you know, internal conflict resolution. So the analogy goes up and down. What is a war? What is a duel? What is a conflict? And I don't think that language really, I don't think the English language specifically has the words that we would need to describe these conflicts in a way that is analogous in these different realms.
Have any of you played Shadow of the Colossus? Because I think we're talking too much about fighting games and first-person shooters. I want to try and go to more niche titles. Or The Last Guard. I haven't played The Last Guardian.
I've only played the original. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Very quietly.
I think you went too niche, Izzy.
No, Shadow of the Colossus isn't super niche. It's actually really popular.
It recently got remade.
I don't play games, but I watch my friends play games every now and then. And like Shadow of the Colossus, the artwork and the design is really, really intriguing.
So for those of you who don't know, so Shadow of the Colossus is a very minimalistic approach. It's the epitome of design by subtraction. This is something a YouTuber, I think he's a game designer as well, by the name of Mark Brown, talks about. I can link this later. And instead of giving like these arbitrary little goals and trinkling around the game, the designer said, no, let's just focus on exactly what I want you to do and what the actual goals are. So the premise of the story is simple. You're a wanderer called Wander. You got to rescue a girl who's in a sleep state, and the only companion you have is a horse, so you can't talk to anyone. You're completely alone, and it has this like post-apocalyptic feeling to it. You're just alone, and it's boss fight after boss fight after boss fight. You trek through the entire game, this wide open space, you soak in the environment, and you're building up clues as to where the next boss fight is. And these guys are titans. It's basically David versus Goliath over and over again, each time getting crazier and crazier in scale. And I think it's basically a very pure example of overcoming hurdles. And the scale of the bosses spike up, with the exception of a few. The game does throw a few wrenches your way. So you do fight one that's a bit smaller but faster. But the final boss is an absolute titan. And if you were given that boss in the first run, there's no way you'd comprehend. Even by the end of it, you're thinking, I'm supposed to take this thing on. So basically, David versus Goliath, the game, and it's a cult classic, I want to say. But I think the remake will draw in more audiences. If you haven't played it, go for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a good game. Not sure if you can hear me or not.
We can hear you.
All right. Yeah, that's I do think that the game does approach with minimalism, even with the story itself. There's actually no real words spoken in the game.
Yeah, it's all fictional.
Yeah, it's just a fictional language. I think you only really get kind of what's going on in the beginning, and I believe after every time you defeat a Titan, do they give you any more information? I think
No, so it's
very
very
sparse.
yeah, like there's these like black threads that burst out of the Titans or the Colossi, and then it has like this very tragic feeling to the game because you're getting stabbed by these things and your character's falling to the ground. After you've essentially won, then you're warped back to the central zone. And I don't want to spoil the game for those of you who haven't played it, but Isaiah, I can have hipster you. I've played Journey too. And there's a dark twist in the game that makes you feel like, oh crap, did I do the right thing? So I don't want to give it away too much. And the name of the calling him antagonist. Okay, I'll call him the antagonist, but I won't say his name. But his name backwards is a famous religious figure as well. So there's like this colossal illusion, like this trying to like
I have
piece
to
the
look
words
into
together.
that.
Yeah, but you know who I'm talking about. It's basically
I don't know the names of any of the characters.
I'll type it in the chat, and I'll type it in reverse, and then look up the story of Abraham versus this figure, and that's where it's inspired by. And the very top of the tower. So there's this tower in the central hub. You can only climb up to that tower if you've built enough stamina, and the only way to build up more stamina is either eating more lizards around the area. So those are the very few sparse collectibles. Or killing colossi
too, right? From the tree.
Yeah, the fruits and the lizards, they'll give you either health or stamina. And I think killing colossi gives you more stamina. So you basically have to replay the game maybe a few times to build it up large enough that you can ascend this giant tower. Yeah. And you can get all the way up there, and it has again this Eden-like imagery on the top.
I haven't played the game since it released.
I'm gonna wait till the end of this. Yeah, I'm gonna wait till the end of this generation and get around to playing Shadow of the Colossus and Horizon, because I'm leaning more towards PC gaming, and I'm kind of getting tired of the PS4. So just for the competitive aspects, I want to play Tekken the best performance I can. I want to look for the next FPS I can find, and but that's a good one. Oh, The Last Guardian, I haven't played it yet, but it's made by the same creators, and I expect great things out of them too.
All right, I just want to talk about one game. I don't know if any of you are familiar. It's called Spec Ops: The Line. Have any of you heard of this?
Yes, I have, and it's I haven't played it, but it has a very clever mechanic in there in storytelling devices, and the twist in there is pretty crazy too. It's a very good first-person shooter.
It's really interesting. I highly recommend it to anybody that's into just kind of examining the atrocities of war, which is what this does, and like how combat affects you.
Yeah, psychologically.
More realistically and psychologically. Like, all these Call of Duty games, like at the end, everyone's just like smashing beers and high-fiving at the end.
Yeah, I forgot
this game does the exact opposite.
I forgot the name of the main protagonist, but they say something like so the enemies at the start will be very confident in confronting you, but then is he called Walker? I think that's his
Yes,
name.
Walker's his name.
Walker. Yeah. So initially, you know, they're very pompous and confident. They're like, oh, tango at 12 or whatever terminology they'll use, or enemy ahead. And later throughout the game, the enemies will be like, shit, it's Walker. Like, they know who you are now. You have a reputation, and they're genuinely scared of you. And you as a player, I think the dialogue your character says is tango down, but then the character becomes more and more morbid, and he's like another one's dead. Like his dialogue starts slurring a bit, and you can tell he's been beaten down. He's like, just killed him. Like it's there's some dehumanization going on, and he's acknowledging that he's killing actual people, and now he's slowly used to it. And you won't see that in a Call of Duty, in my opinion. But Spec Ops is a jam.
I'm surprised you know so much about it without playing it.
I watched a few things about it. This is what happens when I look too much into game design. But I should have played that game blindly, and
it's
then
not the greatest game. Like, I'll tell you this much: it's like game-wise, it's pretty mediocre, but story-wise, it's kind of out of this world.
Yeah, it's experimental, and I think this industry should like hold those kind of games as valuable. You kind of need them.
Yeah, like you're definitely right. In the beginning, he's very professional, you know, professional soldier, and by the end of the game, just like simple call outs and, you know, battlefield chatter becomes this emotional and aggressive and antagonistic thing instead of the professional calling out tangos and, you know, taking cover. There was no real celebratory action in the very beginning when you're taking on soldiers, but by the end he's just totally engulfed in bloodlust. It's really interesting how they changed the dialogue system during the combat like that, and how they gradually rolled out his professional dialogue and then snuck in, you know, this little aggressive, you know, maniacal dialogue. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, because it's one thing for a medium to tell you, you know, war is bad, but it's another thing when an interactive medium puts you in there, have you kill people or, you know, virtual people, and see the actual gradual transformation of the character. I think that's a far better message to send instead of war is bad, kids, or things like that.
Well, it gives you a lived experience of it rather than just telling you about it. And I mean, I think that's the real, you know, power of video games, is they give you these immersive experiences, and that's, you know, that's for better and for worse, right? You get sucked up in it. And I think that's the interesting thing, is that, you know, like, this goes back to Andrew's question about what is the effect of video games on people psychologically. Well, you know, you're going to immerse one person in Grand Theft Auto, and it's going to be a place for them to stress relief and sort of vent their trollish behavior, as Dusty is saying. And another person you put in that environment, and they're going to be like, this is so much fun, let's try it in real life. So I think, you know, different people are going to react to these worlds in different ways.
Yeah, until they take an arrow to the knee.
Oh no, please don't. That's so last decade. Someone mentioned Breath of the Wild. Has anyone here played it?
I have not. I don't have a Switch.
I have to. I'll get around to getting a Switch. But one thing I've heard about Breath of the Wild is this very open game design. You can actually, I think you can fight the final boss right away if you want to, but you will get completely destroyed. So it's the game's way of telling you, without telling you, go out there and... Oh, so wait, Isaiah, have you played it? You explain this. I won't. If you played it.
I have not played it.
Oh, okay.
However, I have observed my friends play. Anything that's Zelda, I am 100% like bought into. So, like, I will literally buy a Switch probably within the next month just to play Breath of the Wild. But I have not played it thus far. Therefore, I have no opinions.
Okay, like any impressions from watching your friends play it?
Yeah, the design is amazing.
Okay, so
It's just like an emergent sandbox that
yeah.
you go and explore, and it's from what I've seen, just by looking at it, it's just has a very Japanese feel. I'm saying by Japanese, it's just the way that they approach game design.
And it seems like some Dark Souls got in there too, with the way you die, and apparently it's a bit more difficult than other Zeldas. I don't know though.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed too is that Zeldas have been, up until this title, have been increasingly super tutorialized. Like, I think the last game is like the first 4 hours of the game is just a straight up tutorial.
Ugh, you wouldn't want to.
And
That's the last thing you need to do.
yeah, so I think
Getting
a lot of
flashbacks
people
to
were
Assassin's Creed 3.
complaining. Yeah, and they were showing how, okay, Dark Souls is doing this without a tutorial. Everybody's loving it. You know, it's one of the most popular games in Japan that's been out. So I think they kind of adopted that model for people to feel like they're actually exploring on their own instead of having their hand held around and told where to go.
Well, and in general, right, if you've done good game design or curriculum design, then it's all woven in and the skills are graduated without you having to, like, it doesn't feel like you're being taught. You're just sort of discovering things step by step.
I think it's just the problem, I guess, with game design, or if you're going like high level AAA game design in general, it's the fear of losing an audience. So that fear is what makes them build these tutorials, because they think they want to capture every single person that they can. But when they do that, they're kind of watering down the experience.
Yeah, like the best tutorials are the ones where the player doesn't realize they're being tutored. And a really good example is Super Mario World 1-1. So at the very beginning, and this was back with like very simple controllers. You had a SNES controller and basically two buttons. So you could quickly explore every option. But the way the opening was designed is you're at the leftmost side of the screen. So if you veer off to that end, you'll quickly realize, okay, I'm supposed to go towards the right. There's a hint given with the way Mario is standing. The first enemy you encounter, if you don't know they're harmful, you can die right there and immediately start back there. So not too much time lost. And then you'll quickly discover, oh, Mario can jump. What happens if I jump on this guy or over him? You've either killed him or you've progressed further on to the level. And as you go further, you'll see a question box, and being the curious person the player would be, they'll try and hit it, and a mushroom comes out. It's like, oh, is this like the previous enemy? Is this going to kill me? But it's happening under a set of bricks, and you're small Mario, so you can't break them. When you try to jump over that mushroom, the one up, you're going to hit your head off the bricks, and you're going to fall into the mushroom, and oh no, it's not a one up, it's a growth mushroom. So you're going to turn into like medium Mario, whatever. You're going to grow basically. And in that small instance, the game already taught you which way to go. You can jump, who the enemies are. You kill them by jumping on them, and there's a power up without explicitly telling you, just right there in 12 seconds. That's an example of really good game design, as opposed to let me just lob walls and walls of text and 4 hours of tutorials. And it's an art form. It's tough to do, but games that are very minimalistic with their tutorials and are respectful of the player to confidently go about, I think that's a much better approach. Like with Dark Souls, you're literally in the overworld. You've got 8 prompts on the ground that you can look at. Boom, you got your instructions, and get out there and get killed over and over again and discover through trial and error.
I'll say Dark Souls is definitely not for a beginning gamer. Like,
No, definitely
you,
not.
no, you can't just be like, oh, I've never played a video game before. Let me play Dark Souls. You'd probably just quit gaming altogether if that was your first game.
I had an interesting thought about that. Like, imagine if that was someone's first game and they've basically been spoiled in a way. If they've gotten used to that in such a, I don't think it's the most difficult game in the series. It's challenging and a little punishing, but once you get the feel of it, Dark Souls can be quite easy. But I'm wondering if what happens to somebody if that's their beginning game and
You know,
going
isn't it
forward.
something interesting? When I played it the first time, um, okay, so you know the first section in the castle, and there's the boss on the bridge. I didn't know you
It
were
sounds
supposed to.
familiar.
Yeah, you fight a giant boss, and you have to do plunges from the little turrets.
Is this Dark
It's
Souls 1?
yeah, the first one.
Okay, I've only seen a speed run of the game, so my memory's
Oh,
hazy.
you never played it?
I played Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 and Demon Souls. Some of Demon I
Ah.
stopped halfway through though.
All right. Well, the first one, the way the world in the first one is, it's not very intuitive, so it doesn't tell you where to go. You have to figure it out. I actually didn't know this, but I fought like a character that was basically a boss to me, but it was just like a regular enemy, and it one shots you. So anytime it hits you, you're dead. And I
Was it
thought
a
that's
Red
how you have
Knight?
to. No, it was Havel.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, he makes an appearance in Dark Souls 3. Um,
I fought Havel like as a level 10 character, and it took me 15 minutes to kill him without getting hit. He's just like a regular enemy.
yeah,
Not regular,
I
but
think
he's just like a dude that spawns, and
I
he
think
doesn't
he
have
was
like.
a NPC character because normally you're not supposed to engage them. That reminds me of fighting Eileen
No,
the
no,
Crow.
he attacks you if you go down
Oh,
there.
oh, okay, gotcha. Because in
So
Bloodborne, go on.
yeah, so he will attack you, and you're not really supposed to fight him. He's very high level. I did not know that. I just thought that's what I had to do. So I spent hours on that, and then I finally beat him. It took me 15 minutes of fighting him, but during that whole time, you can't get hit because he one shots you with any hit. So I finally beat him, and I progressed to the next area, and the area is just super difficult. And I did finally progress enough to figure out that, oh, I really wasn't supposed to go this way. Um, it's way too hard. It gets crazy because they don't tell you where you need to go, but if you're not really cognizant of what's going on and how fast the area is getting difficult, um, that's how they kind of funnel you towards areas by how difficult the enemies are. If you feel they're just right, that's probably where you're supposed to be. But I didn't know this at the time. This was my first Souls game, so I just thought it was just crazy, crazy difficult for no reason. But it was just that
And
I didn't get filtered towards the
that
right path.
that reminds me of blending difficulty in games with like scary games. So the example I'm going to use is Bloodborne again. But the very beginning of Bloodborne, especially if you're new, is really grueling. And the game has traps set about, and after getting used to the harsh conditions there, the players just automatically on their tippy toes. They're like really cautious of everything, and the game soundtrack's really subdued in these moments. So you're really invested in the game. It's quiet, it's dreary, the game's difficult as hell, and you're really cautious. And then out of nowhere, behind a barrel, some guy with a machete just bursts out at you and gives you a heart attack. And they usually die in 2 hits, but it's just little simple things like that to keep you on your toes. Basically, you're cautious the whole way through.
Yeah, Dark Souls 1 and 2 both have a lot of that in it.
I just want to say one of the things I've really learned in this call is that the problem of experts not understanding how little novices know applies in literally every domain of life, because you two might as well be speaking Greek as far as I'm concerned.
I'm so sorry.
That's what I was
thinking not
afraid
to-
of. That's the sort of thing about gamers. Is just that if you're not one, we're speaking a different language.
I guess
No,
we
but
acquired a skill.
yeah, I know, but I mean, you have, and I mean, I think that's the point. Is I don't think that it's a bad thing. I think it's a good demonstration of the universality of that principle. And listen, if you've acquired the skill of gaming and fallen down that rabbit hole, there's no reason why you can't fall down any rabbit hole. And to me, that's the most important thing about mixed metal arts is if you've fallen down one rabbit hole and you've gotten good at anything, you can do the same thing everywhere and with everything. And the more we're all learning from each other and cross applying those lessons, like there are certain general principles I've picked out from this call, even if I don't understand all the details, like how well do games translate to life. Like that's a really useful lesson for me in thinking about curriculum design. So I think this has been a super helpful chat for me, even if I don't necessarily understand everything that you guys are saying.
Video game
Yeah,
bell system. Let's go. I'm joking.
yeah. And I don't even feel like I'm an expert. There's like people who know way more than me and play way better than me. I just like to play like a wide range of things, but I'm not really like super experty in any of them. Like the only thing I ever was an expert at was what was that game? It was like a British studio, Time Splitters. I don't know if any of you
Oh
are
yeah, that was an arcade series. You had to use
right.
like a
So
light gun or something.
no. This was okay. So the team that made GoldenEye created a. They left Rare and they created a team called Free Radical, and then they created a series called Time Splitters, and it basically had the same exact mechanics as GoldenEye, except they put their own spin on it. It was about a time traveler, going through different eras. Anyway, the third game, was it the third or second? Well, I think it was the third. The third game, I was so good that I was ranked like fourth in the world of killing people by melee.
Whoa.
Well, I played that game way too much. It's just that the only reason I played it so much is that I really got a good group of people that I played with, and it's mostly for social reasons that I played it, not really for competitive reasons. Like I didn't go on there to like, oh, let me go on and just like kill a bunch of people. The only reason I'd go on would be to hang out with specific people. Like that's basically any time I've ever played any of those the shooters. I never really enjoyed any of them playing just by myself. I'd have to have a group of friends that's already playing and I would join in and we just have like our normal discussions of, life and etc. while, playing a game. So it's more a social experience for me than a, competition thing.
That's one of the great things about games, right? It can bring you closer together to other people and help enhance your social intelligence.
Yeah, I was never
I don't know
comfortable
about.
being a
Well,
leader.
there's some positive social aspects to it, but there's also the whole shut-in thing too, so that can work very negative.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and online toxic behavior is also a problem too. Like I don't know who said at the beginning, but when they're saying, "Oh, there's more girls in games now," but talking to a few of them, it seems like whenever their voices are heard online, there's just like a bunch of dudes like jumping on them, giving them a hard time.
Well, it's just
And I'm
like
like,
testosterone-filled
Not surprising.
teenagers.
yeah,
That's gonna
But
happen.
doesn't it seem massively self-defeating? Like, shouldn't like that's what I don't understand. I mean, like, I understand it because, there's whatever insecurities and there's whatever else, but like wouldn't you want to make gaming as inviting to girls as possible because then you could date a cute gamer girl?
yeah,
It
and
happens if you're like a
I don't
Twitch
think-
streamer,
I
maybe.
don't think the guys who comment like that are thinking that deeply about it.
it's more of I think this happened with comic books where there's like, oh, this is our thing, girls shouldn't be in there, and now they're quote unquote invading our space. This And the thing is, this was never your thing in the first place. These games are open to everyone.
Yeah, to build
Agreed.
off that, like, so there's an event in the Washington D.C. area called MagFest, and it's a cosplay slash video game
Video game
slash
music.
yeah, it's a music and video game fest, and there's tons of chicks who go there, and a lot of them are hot, a lot of them are not. That's besides the point. There's a lot of ugly dudes who go there. It's such a false dichotomy to say, oh, we should get some hot gamer chicks. Like, most dudes who I know who have the Cheeto fingers like I do are not as good looking as this guy. But the reality is that, you know, there's always a girl out there for who will fit your aesthetic, regardless of what you look like, regardless of how ugly you are. I mean, that's how there's so many ugly people. I sound like I'm talking shit, but I'm not. There's a lot of ugly people in the world because there's a lot of ugly people who like to have sex too. So you don't have to be good looking to find somebody who will fuck you. It's such a false dichotomy that we fall into in our culture because we emphasize false beauty so often. You know, I mean, like, if physical beauty is so subjective that it's almost nonsensical. And we could have that conversation on a different chat because that's such a whole tangent that I can go off on. But the whole point is that, you know, males do not have a monopoly on nerddom.
Exactly.
While you know, the online display of who is a nerd may be skewed towards showing the maleness of it. I hesitate to say that it's a male trait as opposed to saying it's a trait of the weird culture, because in weird cultures, males tend to be the early adopters of high technology.
I think
I'll just say
regardless, though,
it's exploded though. It's definitely exploded as far as like female interest. Games in general, anime in general, you know, nerdy stuff in general.
And with what you were just saying, Isaiah, to quote Chris Rock from his newest comedy special on Netflix, you gots to fuck.
Well, that's
Hunter,
if you're
what were
in a
you-
relationship.
Wait, so Hunter, what were you about to say?
all I was going to say is that, you know, I mean, I think this gets to sort of larger social issues in terms of like women in tech or, you know, high melanin individuals in tech or anything like that. I mean, I just think that so many of these conversations, it seems like, you know, if the clubhouse, whether the clubhouse is tech or games or sports or anything like that, is a clubhouse that is warm and inclusive and is like, hey, it's cool that you're interested in this. You may not know a lot now, but like we want you here and we think your interest is awesome and like all of that sort of stuff, then you're, you know, that clubhouse is going to attract more people just by being warm and cool and inviting. And if the second you wander into that clubhouse, you know, you're seeing the sort of negative behavior that you're seeing or the shitty sidelong glances, I mean, it doesn't even have to be anything said, that just sends the message that you're not welcome here, then you're going to be like, okay, cool guys, got the message. I'm going to go elsewhere and find other people who I can hang out with who are cool and not dicks.
This reminds me of this amazing person that I encountered in the Destiny forums. He sadly passed away a year ago. And this guy was probably one of the best players I've ever seen. but he was the most patient and welcoming, kind-hearted individual that I've met online. And he was like really popular amongst our community and to the extended community too, to the point that Bungie recognized who he was too. And I remember,
is that the one that they like named something after him?
I don't know if they named, well, what's the name? Because I don't want to give away his.
I don't remember, but I remember. I think it was Destiny. I don't know if it was Destiny or another game that they immortalized the player who died of cancer by adding like some type of item.
No, okay, so he didn't die from cancer, but
Oh, okay.
I don't recall if Destiny 2 did anything for him, but the point was like this guy was extremely good at this game, but he was not arrogant. He was very welcoming, very kind-hearted to everyone. And I remember the first time I was playing with him, there's this gun that was in circulation. If you get 7 wins in Trials of Osiris, which was basically the competitive mode, it was called the Doctrine of Passing. It was essentially a laser beam, would just annihilate anyone, but it was really hard to get. So 2 people from our community, well, it was more than 2. You need a team of 3. So 2 people who were really good would volunteer to help carry another person, and we would play together to get those 7 wins. And everyone in our little crew had that gun. We'd go out into the wild on our own, and we just start destroying everyone.
Nice.
And playing those sessions with him, he was like telling me little nuances. I would make like terrible rookie mistakes, but he wouldn't shout at me. He'd be like, Izzy, a better approach would be to do this because when you overextended to that area, we couldn't have your back or we couldn't get your revive. And that's why we had to fight a different way. So instead, you're better off pulling back. And he'd tell me like step by step what to do in a very welcoming way. And I thank him for playing the game as long as I have.
That's very rare.
Yeah, it is. And that's why he was remembered so well and fondly. But I think I was lucky with the community I have because in general, they were really welcoming. He had like a ripple effect to everyone because there's people who would have like a regular raid assist session. So he would have a bunch of people help other newer players like every weekend if you want to do the raid, get the bonuses or whatever. And I remember talking to this other person. She's basically, I don't want to call her a gamer girl. I don't think she identifies like that. But she's told me that she had her fair share of toxic behavior from certain dudes. And it's a typical melodrama, like, oh, you're not a real gamer because by virtue of you being a girl, blah, blah, blah. But this mentor figure that I was talking about, he like encouraged her in a really positive way, and she's like one of the best snipers in Destiny 1, in my opinion. Like I've seen a few, but when I was wondering, like, why is this girl so good at this game? It's like, oh, it's because of that guy who positively influenced her. It's moments like those that just warms my heart. And that's like the great boon of the social aspects of gaming.
That's cool.
But that's something that's something that you can have in any field. Like, I wish there were more people like that in science. Like most of them are competitive asshole dicks who, there's the whole like, you haven't earned your stripes yet. Who the fuck are you? You work for me, blah, 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 blah. And I'm only interested in you as far as you're useful. And then there are awesome people who are like really get to know you, really take an interest in you, really mentor. And, the same, I know from talking to Brian, you see the same thing in the comedy scene. You see the same thing everywhere. So I think that's the point is that, we need more of that great mentorship. And the more we can all sort of do that in whatever field we're in, like that is the shit that changes people's lives. And as Izzy is saying, has ripple effects.
Yeah, and that's the motivation behind. So I'm working on the revamping a Tekken thread on this gaming forum because a new guest character from Final Fantasy 15 is coming over, and I expect an influx of a lot of new players. So I want to have this done before then and have a lot of new people come in, see the original thread, make it as welcoming as possible. It's like, hey guys and girls, like, join in. This is what we're all about. This is the game. And on a non-gaming related notice, that's also why I'm doing the Islamic belt system for MMA, or mixed martial arts. That's basically the motivation behind it.
One thing that's interesting too that I don't think we covered was that certain games can actually teach you some pretty important social skills if you seek those specific skills. Like for instance, let me switch over to a better microphone. All right, I'm here. Better microphone.
Jesus.
Like for instance, I quit playing MMOs because they're just way too addictive. But to get into it, like I was never like the leader type or the type that would gather people up and go out and do something. It was just like, oh, I'll do whatever everybody's else doing. But there was this one point where I was a part of a, well, this is a mix, what you call a MMO, and that means
Dustin, there's an echo on your voice.
Online RPG. So that means there's a massive amount of people playing at the same time. It's not like where you just go into a room and you're playing with 10 people. It's just a massive amount of people that you're playing with. So with that said, one of the leaders of this group left, and he made me the person in charge. I was like, okay, I wasn't really expecting it. But he's like, yeah, you're always helping out. You're always like leading like activities and like helping out our new members get situated and helping them get, you're always putting other people before yourself by helping them before you work on your own character. I was like, yeah, I guess that's right. That's why I've not even maxed out, and I've been playing this for like 2 years. So it really made me learn like how to take on a leadership role. It's without a lot of risk, but it did help me figure out like what are the aspects that you need to know in order to organize like a large group of people.
Yeah, you're basically mentoring in a way, leading people.
Yeah, it's just like teaching people. It's like you're the teacher, you're the mentor. People are going to go to you to ask for assistance or ask for help because they know you've done this tough thing already that, a new player hasn't, and you can always help them. And it always helped too that I was a tank character, so every party needs a tank. So I could always help out with something because I'd be the person. Well, I wasn't soaking up damage because I was ninja, but I was basically in that game. There's like real tank and there's a paper tank, which is what I was.
Is this Overwatch or some other game?
No, this is Final Fantasy 11. This is
old school. Okay. Are you playing 14?
No, I didn't. I did a little bit, but
because
11 was like way better in my opinion.
Have you played like Realm Reborn?
Well, I played 14 before the Realm Reborn. I was like, oh, this sucks. I'm out of here.
Apparently it got a lot better.
Well, yeah, so in 11 I was a ninja, which is basically a tank that doesn't take damage. Like you dodge everything, but you try to keep the attention of the enemy. But if you do get hit, you're like you'll get devastated pretty badly. But anyway, I was looked up to. People were asking for my help, and I gladly gave my help. Like even though there were like a lot of tasks I needed to complete for my character, I was more fulfilled helping out like other people than working on my own character. Like working on my own character was always the last thing on my mind.
And that would have I'd have moments like that in online Tekken where if I'm playing against someone and I beat them quite harshly, but they'll always say something like "good game," and then I'll make like a small comment like, "Here's a video link for a tutorial," like in a friendly way, and sometimes they're surprised and thank you so much for the help, and So, they'll say like, no, how can I be as good as you? And I remind them there's always people better. Like a friend of mine that I regularly spar with, like he just destroys me to like 40 to 5, me being the 5. So there's always people better out there. There's always room for growth.
What you're all talking about, I mean, I don't want to speak for Hunter, of course, but it seems like that's
well,
kind
your
of
audio just skipped out on me.
my audio.
I think it's because of my connection.
Can everyone else hear me?
I can hear you.
I can.
Okay, so what were you saying, Andrew?
Well, I don't want to speak for Hunter, of course, but it seems like that's kind of a core value of mixed mental arts, being a teacher and a mentor who creates teachers and mentors who like to create more teachers and mentors.
Very well put, Andrew. Yep. And I think that's the point, is that's the core value of any healthy community. Like, that's what all communities should be doing. And I mean, I think the point of mixed mental arts is, we're creating an opt-in community where people can choose to live by and practice those values. And then ultimately, the goal is to have all cultures operating on that principle, whether the culture is the culture of video gaming, the culture of science, the culture of Christianity, the culture of Islam, the culture of the United States, the culture of a particular company, the culture of a sports team. And because the point is that, I mean, for those of us who have, read the relevant biology and read some of these books, it's pretty clear that what makes for effective cultures is the same. And, I mean, what Dan Coyle talked about, safety, vulnerability, and purpose. And, to go back to an earlier comment about Dustin made, where, you go into some of these gamer forums and it's just like, the N word, this, and then what was the other thing? Oh, cuck, which I guess is this other C word, the male C word.
What does cuck even mean exactly? I hear that all the time, but I really don't understand what it means.
I think the technical definition is if you're married or you're with someone and you let them sleep around or something. I don't know. Something like that.
Isn't that like the porn definition, but there's also something to do with being a conservative or something like that?
Yeah, there's cuckservative. So cuckolding is, this old thing of having your wife be fucked by another man. But then cuckservative is someone who doesn't have the balls to, I guess, adhere to whatever the ideology of the alt-right is, and is just sort of a boring conservative. But, it's always been popular to undermine people's masculinity by, with whatever. I mean, it's all that culture of like, I'm going to denigrate and try and cheapen you, is not an effective culture, because you're not ultimately creating the sort of safety and community that allows people to be vulnerable and, share their concerns, share their best ideas, open up, and try and iterate and build on each other. So I think that, I mean, Andrew, I think that was very well said. And yeah, I mean, I think that not only is that a core value of MMA, but just to build on that, I think that's what works for effective human cultures, whatever banner they fly under.
Hunter, I know which game you should play when you get the time. So this is like comparing altruism versus, I guess, the selfish gene in a way. But there's a game called Darkest Dungeon. I haven't played it yet, but I've heard really good things about it. But the game is very scarce on its resources. And if you want to make progress, you basically have to use up people or your characters. And you start making progress the moment you take on the heart of like a cruel CEO, let's say somewhere like Exxon or whatever. And there's a lot of morality behind the mechanics. That's kind of the tagline in a way. But when I heard about that game, I immediately thought about, I forgot who said it. Was it David Slow Wilson? They're saying altruistic
the two
groups.
Wilsons.
Yeah, altruistic groups prosper better than selfish groups, but selfish individuals prosper better than altruistic individuals short term, or something like that. I'm watering
No,
it down.
that's exactly right.
Oh, okay.
Altruistic groups outcompete selfish groups. Selfish individuals outcompete altruistic individuals, and that's David Sloan Wilson and then E.O. Wilson. So
Gotcha.
two Wilsons.
And if you want to see that in full fruition, play Darkest Dungeon. That game reminds me of that so much. Yeah, that's your game
like
recommendation.
That's my game recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, I actually think that would be a fun thing to do. I mean, Dusty was talking about like what was the last game that we played that really blew us away. But I also would love to hear, if what 3 games does everybody on this chat think the world would be better if we'd all played?
Okay, Bloodborne. So I'll start off. Bloodborne, Shadow of the Colossus, BioShock 1. And I'm gonna cheat and say Metal Gear Solid 3. That's the bonus.
Okay, good. Who's next?
I would say first would be Metal Gear Solid 3. It's not a good game, but it has a great story. Recommending Spec Ops: The Line. And my last one would be, damn, that's a hard one. I'd have to say Deus Ex, the very first one,
Which one? Oh, the first one.
because I love conspiracy theories. You
Dun, dun,
notice
dun. Oh, you were talking.
a lot of stealth games, lots of conspiracies.
Andrew.
I haven't really seriously gamed that much in a long time, but back when I used to, my favorites were probably the Halo games and also the Fable games. The Fable games are probably my favorite RPGs. And then also I really like those Uncharted games for the PS3 because it's kind of like you're Indiana Jones and you have to solve puzzles and also fight bad guys and go through ancient ruins and stuff like that.
Basically, Indiana Jones. Uncharted 4 was great.
Yeah. Tomb Raider has been following that path as well lately.
And Isaiah, we already know you're going to say Zelda, so other two.
Isaiah took off.
Oh, he's gone. Oh, okay. And Dustin Hunter, I don't know, how many games have you played?
Mega Man.
I actually used to play games as a kid, but always felt guilty about playing them because I felt like they weren't important and that academics were important. And I think that I mean, Christopher Leon Price, we had a bit of a conversation about that. I had a conversation with Andrew Hunt, and then I'm lucky enough to be dating a female gamer, and she got me playing Witcher, which was pretty.
Good game.
Yeah, it was pretty mind blowing, honestly.
Witcher 3?
It was Witcher 3, yeah, and it was pretty mind blowing. And then I tried to kill Dettlaff, and it was not good. And then I came downstairs and I saw something on the ground, and I thought it was a piece of fluff, and then it turned out to be a spider in Africa, and I freaked out because an African spider was on my finger, and then I threw the spider and screamed like a girl, and then I had to redeem my masculinity by fucking killing the spider, and then I begged her to kill Dettlaff for me. So I would say, and she and I talked about this a little bit, and she was like, I think that you're gonna play Witcher from the beginning to the end. So I'm excited to sort of get into the Witcher series. Like, I think that was my last significant gaming experience, and I'm excited to explore games more. But yeah, like Andrew, I haven't gamed in a while, so my references are going to be super old on this. But Civilization 2 was fucking mind blowing for me, and I think like so much of what school should be is playing games like that to hook your interest. And then, from there you can sort of get deeper into it. But like, I'll never forget the Civilization 2 skills tree, essentially. I thought that was brilliant. So that's game.
I love games that do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's definitely game 1 for me. Game 2 is definitely Zelda, specifically Ocarina of Time. And then game 3 for me, just to go in a totally different direction, there was this super old school game that my mom and I used to play called Digger. And Digger was a great game. You basically had to go around and chop your way through sand, and then there were emeralds and bags of gold and like little bugs. But it was just like a super simple game. But again, like to Dusty's point, like you learn really quickly by failing again and again and again. And I think that, it's a sort of thing where I wish that somebody, when I played that game way, way, way back as a kid of 6, 7, or 8, had sort of drawn out that larger lesson about the power of failure as a teacher. And I think that, I think that's just a lot of, it's like any, like games in many senses are like parables. There's a lesson there, but often people need help having those lessons drawn out.
Awesome.
And I think
haven't-
to cap.
Go ahead. No, I was gonna say. I'm sorry. just really, really quick, because I just got to say something blasphemous real quick. I haven't played like a lot of the newer Zeldas, but my favorite one is Wind Waker.
So I was gonna make a pun to say, to capture the soul of this chat was Dark Souls. Haha. 1 is getting remastered.
Again? The first one? The very first one?
Izzy?
Uh-oh, I think he lost.
Yeah, I think he lost him. But what I want to say, Dusty, is can we just talk about the fact that you can pick any fucking franchise and you're going to make a case that the oddball choice is actually the best member of that franchise?
No, because Metal Gear Solid 3 is known as the best one.
Okay. What's the best one in Star Wars?
You mean like the movies or the game?
Movies.
My favorite?
Yeah.
It's gonna seem stupid.
Go for it.
All right, like I really like the old ones, but if I have to say, Clone Wars is my favorite because I really like Mace Windu.
Jesus Christ. I think in general this is a pattern. What's your favorite Harry Potter?
I've actually only started watching them, so I've only seen up to the 3rd.
Okay,
like, I haven't seen all of them. I've only seen up to the 3rd movie.
Okay, so out of the first 3, what's your favorite?
I really like the first one so far.
Okay.
Chamber of Secrets? Is that the second one?
Chamber of Secrets.
The third one? I forgot.
Well, all I know is the second one is the worst one.
The one with the snake.
Well, I don't like that one. No.
Why is that one the worst one?
Because it has fucking Dobby in it. I'm thinking of the books more than the movies, but Dobby is the Jar Jar Binks of the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah, he
does. Dobby.
Dobby is the house elf.
I forgot which one had there was like an underground area where Harry delved into, and I think character's name was Tom.
It's Chamber of Secrets.
It was played by that Twilight guy. I forgot his name.
That's Chamber of Secrets. That's the second one.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Dobby sucks. Anyway, the point is that, Dustin, there is a bit of a pattern of you making oddball choices in franchises. It's not a 100% pattern, and I will tell you that I have never heard anyone make as good of a case for DS9 being the best.
DS9's the best one.
Yeah, it was impressive to me. I mean, that was impressive, and I'm actually increasingly like maybe it was last year I worked through all of TNG on Netflix, and I'm actually kind of tempted to now go and work through all of DS9 again.
Dude, DS9, you won't regret it. Like I like the first one, not the first one.
I don't even know what those acronyms are that you guys.
Okay, DS9 means Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Oh, okay.
And the other one is TNG, which means the next generation. That's like
Right.
Picard,
Right.
Data, Captain Riker. That one is like galaxy exploring, your typical Star Trek fare of them going to planets, meeting new people. Each episode is pretty much like a self-contained story with like a lesson and a moral lesson and et cetera, et cetera.
What's your favorite of the new Star Wars movies, Dusty? And did you hear that?
I didn't see the newest one.
Oh, okay.
But
Did
I
you
loved
hear that
Rogue One,
Quentin
though.
Tarantino is
Rogue One.
apparently directing the newest one?
I had no idea, but out of the newest ones that have come out so far, I like Rogue One the best. Like, I haven't seen the newest one, but Rogue One was definitely better than the restart of it. The other one, what was it called? Can't even remember the name, but I watched it once. And I was like, this is just A New Hope. Basically.
I like Rogue One a lot too, because it seems like more gritty and realistic and less about like the main characters and the Jedi and more about like people having to solve problems without having lightsabers and force powers and shit like that.
Rogue One is basically the Magnificent Seven with a badass like female lead character.
That's a good way of describing it.
Yeah, like a sci-fi Magnificent Seven.
Sounds like it was scaling back to focus more.
Yeah, it was just like a more, I don't know, just like the first one of the new series just seemed way too cliche, and like I know it's supposed to be an homage, but it's basically A New Hope with like a new set of paint on it. Rogue One just was a different movie. It wasn't like a rehashed plot.
I haven't seen the brand new one yet either, but I've heard that from a few people that it's phenomenally amazing, even people who aren't like Star Wars fans.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get out to movies nowadays. I just gotta wait till they get dropped on DVD or Blu-ray.
That's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I don't know why everyone thinks I pick weird things. Wind Waker was badass.
I've never played Wind Waker, and I actually like that's the other thing that I really want to get into in gaming is play my way through the Zeldas.
Well,
'Cause
Wind
there's-
Waker, I don't know if you know about it, but it's a naval game. They replaced the landmass of Hyrule with water, so you spend a lot of time sailing.
Yeah, I've seen. I had a student who had Wind Waker, and he showed me a little bit of it. But yeah, I haven't played any of the Zeldas since Ocarina of Time.
What's the best one since Ocarina of Time? Yeah, Wind Waker.
What about Majora's Mask?
I thought
That's a weird game, but I never beat that game. I played it for a while. I thought it was interesting. It's basically Groundhog Day, but I thought it was okay.
Yeah, I barely
You
even
know what?
that one.
I want to
My
go
friends
back.
is all about it,
Final
though. What are you saying, Izzy?
Yeah, I was saying I want to go back through the Final Fantasies again. Well, I played some,
You
but
do not want to play the first one. You do not want to play part one.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I want to play 6, 7, and 12 for now. And I think 4 is pretty good, is it? I heard.
I never
But
beat. The only Final Fantasy I ever beat was none of them. Actually, I beat 7. That's the only one I've gotten far in a lot of them, but I haven't beaten.
I think that's the
all.
most popular one that everyone's familiar with. FS7.
Oh yeah, I beat 13 also.
I played halfway through 7 and I didn't get back to it because I was playing Chrono Trigger at the same time. But I heard 6 is really good.
6 is
And
amazing.
it's a lot. I think my connection is skipping out, but I heard like a lot of fan favorites is 6, and 12 apparently has a really good English dub for the voice actors, and the script is meant to be really good too. I'll give
12
that a whirl.
is good. It's a very long game, and it's basically an MMO, but you're not playing an MMO, if that makes sense. The mechanics are MMO.
Gotcha. Is that a good or a bad thing in that instance?
It's hard because you're controlling 3 people real time in an MMO like battle. That makes it difficult. Like imagine playing an MMO and then you're controlling 3 party members while fighting a boss.
Oh boy. Wait, so in
Yeah,
real
it's not
time?
turn-based. No, it's not turn-based. It's real time. So,
I
but
think
the
that
thing,
might be up my alleyway then, because as much as I like turn-based, I like action maybe a little bit more. I
then
don't
you'd
know.
probably
That's just
like
me.
13 then.
Nah, I gave that a try before, but I dropped that really quickly.
Oh, I beat 13. It
Yeah.
was all right. 11,
Yeah.
you'd like it. But you can set up AI macros for the other party members so you don't have to deal with them too much, but sometimes you do have to switch to them.
The latest one I played was 15. That one I think had mixed opinions, mostly positive. I really liked it. That was really action heavy though.
It's probably close to what 12 is. Yes.
Well, I just remembered another game that I really like playing recently, even though I haven't really gamed that much in a while. Playing zombies on or zombie mode on one of the Call of Duty games. That's lots of fun to do.
It's probably Black
That's what
Ops.
Yeah, that's what made me want to play Destiny because I was playing with friends in zombie mode, and the original pitch for Destiny was like, you're playing with your friends on this online world, and you take on all this PvE, so player versus enemy, and then you also have PvP. And to me, that sounded like zombies mode, but far more expanded and like a whole quest and everything. So I got immediately hooked to that. Granted, like the final product I think didn't come exactly like the concepts, and I think Destiny 2 is a lot worse, like a lot more watered down, and that's why I'm trying to look for a replacement. But maybe Monster Hunter might be it. I don't know.
I'd say if you've played any of the previous Monster Hunters, I'd say give it a try.
Isn't Destiny like an RPG?
A
Yeah,
little bit, kind of.
it's a first-person shooter and an RPG essentially. It's
Oh,
blurring a lot of genres together. The
okay.
thing is, like, I have to be really picky with the games I play because there's so many coming out, and that's why the approach I take is pick 2 multiplayer games for the year, like 2 big ones, and then be selective of the well-acclaimed games out there. Problem with this approach is you're unlikely to come across more niche games, but I'm seeing even what I would have thought as niche getting a lot of uh, was it appraisal or a lot of praise. The one I'm thinking of right now is Near Automata, which apparently deals with topics like the whole idea of humanity and suicide. Takes place in a super futuristic world where everyone's robots, some crazy heavy themes, and it's a game that looks like I want to give a try. Basically, what I do is I wait till the end of the year, and after having played through all my games, I'll look back on the year and say, okay, which games did I miss out on? Which ones are heavily discounted and highly rated? And let me just go through all of them instead of, because the thing with playing certain games on the first day, they're usually not well optimized for some reason, and a patch has to come to fix the game, or a DLC has to come to solve some problem. And I'm thinking, like, what happened to having a polished product on the first day? That's
Yeah,
It seems
usually you
like it's
don't
happening more
purchase.
often.
I purchase when it becomes
Mm.
game of the year.
Yeah, and that edition has everything. It has the DLC, it has all the expansions, all the patches worked in, and you're getting the complete product, and usually at a discounted price.
Yeah,
So
that's what I did for Dark Souls 2.
yeah, I did that with Dark Souls 3, and I did that with Bloodborne.
Yeah, it's not really worth unless you're like you have amazing amount of time. it's not really worth purchasing a game when it releases, in my opinion.
Yeah, go
Unless
for
you're
a
like,
quality over quantity approach. Yeah.
because I'm
And
like
you,
you, Izzy, I can only pick a couple games a year to play because I just don't have enough time to play them. Like but
yeah,
I'll pick crappy ones like right now.
like going back to the whole like shut-in kind of lifestyle, like playing multiple games isn't necessarily a good thing. I'd rather play fewer games of a higher quality and treasure those anecdotal moments that I get. Like I still remember games I played while things like Shadow of the Colossus, which was a couple of years ago. But I don't think it would have had the same impact on me had I been playing, I don't know, 20 games a year or something. And some people play way more. I think it's just too excessive, and you've now bridged the line from a hobby to an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, I stopped the online games because I played so many of them in the past that most of the new ones aren't really, there's not much new to offer for me to continue to play that game style. And it's just because I've been playing
Yeah.
online games since I was like 15, and we're talking
Yeah.
about like 1996.
Some of them
So
can
it's,
suck you in like crazy. Yeah. That's
yeah,
why
so,
it's good to be really selective. Pick one or two main online games for the whole year, and make sure it's with friends you know and it's a regular crew. Like make it a social event or a weekly social event, and
yeah,
then you
and
can
then
play your
yeah,
yeah.
that's another reason why I don't play online games that much is because many of my friends, we all have like kids now, so none of us are like spending a
That's
lot of
understandable.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not spending a lot of time on online playing games, so our crew kind of broke up due to life circumstances.
And that's why I treat the single player games like reading a book, but like a very long
Yes.
one. So I think if you divide it like that and focus on quality over quantity and cherishing those
Yeah.
few moments, you'll have a much better experience with games overall.
Certainly, yes. Yeah, back when I was younger, I could fiddle around what they call shitoge, which no kusoge, which is just like really bad games. Right now, it's you gotta really hone in on the ones you think you're gonna enjoy instead of just popping something in and hoping for the best. It's actually more important now that we can watch reviews of things and see if we think we're gonna enjoy something rather than waste our
Yeah.
time with something.
And hear from our peers that know what game seems to be pretty good. And essentially like have them try it for us before we get there.
Yeah, crowdsourcing.
That seems like something that would be a valuable thing to sort of add, because I mean it's the same thing with books. Like a large part of what people are resonating with is a curated book list. I think it'd be really good to have a curated film list and a curated game list and a curated document list and podcast list, because like there's just such an overabundance of media in general. Like it's hard to know where to devote our time, like what's going to give us the best return for our temporal and our financial buck.
Yeah, I'm still going through the book list I got from Dr. Gillan for the Islamic Belt system. And I still have to go through the book list in Mixed Mental Art because I really need to. I've only read tidbits of The Righteous Mind, but I really need to properly sit down and go through that book. And what's the other book that Jonathan Haidt wrote? I
Happiness
forgot that.
hypothesis.
Yeah, Happiness Hypothesis. I'm thinking of that too. I need to, especially because there also happen to be in the other book list that Dr. Galan provided. So I think that's a quirky coincidence. But I think those
Overlap.
are really crucial books to read for the topics I'm going to deal with.
I don't know that it's a quirky coincidence. I think that like Brian said this on one of the most recent podcasts, just like it seems like a lot of what you guys are saying is what the old religions were saying in general, like that we could sit down with the Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad and Moses and they would know exactly what we were talking about. So, I mean, I think that the uncomfortable truth is that science has reinvented the wheel on a lot of this stuff, and in some senses it's clearer, in some senses it's more nuanced and more detailed, but the general principles are just a restatement of what was said a long, long time ago. And so it's not a surprise to me that that someone like Muhammad,
it's intertwining.
yeah, and it's not a surprise to me that like Muhammad Hilal reads the happiness hypothesis and the righteous mind is like, yeah, this is what Islam is actually about, because that's what it was about in the first place.
Hey, Izzy, are there any games that you think explore Islam in a good way?
Trying to think of one. I don't think so.
What about the
See, the
first
thing was,
Assassin's
like,
Creed?
Assassin's Creed 1, it's not really. It's similar to the way you described Italy. Like it's very surface level. Did any game explore? I don't think certain games even explored religion that well. The only one I can think of, and it's a very odd example, is Phoenix Wright, and it's I think it's the fourth
Right.
entry. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily talk about religion, but it talks about faith. There's this really good channel on YouTube called Games as Literature, and basically what this guy is trying to do, he's trying to form like a canon kind of book list kind of thing, but with video games. And I think that's an amazing idea. He's not the only one doing it, but he
That's an interesting
explained,
concept.
yeah, and the Phoenix Wright series is basically you're this lawyer, and it's kind of like a visual novel blended
I think
with,
it's a game that Hunter
yeah,
could get into.
it's amazing. That the Phoenix Wright series is one of the most niche but wild card games out there. And you're basically a lawyer, and you're supposed to ideally have faith in your defendant, and you're going around
Objection.
yeah, objection. That's where that meme comes from. And you're looking for clues, and you're trying to gather evidence, and it takes elements of fighting game. It's made by Capcom, so you're gathering evidence, you're gathering information, you're talking to people, you're interacting with the world, and then in the courtroom, the way the heads up display, the HUD is set up, the way the characters are standing, you have prosecutor versus attorney, and it's almost like a fighting game. You're like, take that, here's a piece of evidence, or objection, or you're listening to a line of reasoning from the defendant, and you're interjecting at these moments. And Ace Attorney 4, there's a key character who has a certain doubt that they can't overcome. They really don't want to believe that a certain character is guilty of a crime. And they really, but the evidence is so overwhelming against it. They're like, you're such an idiot to deny this. Like the main character will go about their day, but he's kind of like an auxiliary character. So he's going through his own painful struggle. And there's this golden line he says, I'm gonna butcher it, but he's like, it's precisely why I have to overcome these seeming paradoxes is why I call it faith, or something like that. That's the definition of faith that they came up with, trying to overcome these seeming paradoxes and hoping after this outcome to come out a stronger person. And it was done in a very niche game. It was very minute, and a lot of people are gonna miss it. And
I know
that's
Phoenix Wright it's niche, but it's actually not unpopular.
it's getting
a niche
more
genre.
popular. Yeah.
It's a niche genre, that's for sure. But it's been a favorite of many game critics.
So that would be the closest allusion, I guess, to faith, but to religion explicitly, not really. Like, and I'm talking about like the heart of religion, because the best you'll probably see from most Western studios is here are a bunch of people with high melanin count in their skin, and they're a bunch of Muslims, and this is the Arab world. I think that's about as good as it's gonna get. You're not gonna get to the soul of the belief system of the other. And I don't think they've done it with Christianity or Judaism either. I think Bloodborne
They
kind of
do
did
with
it.
Christianity a lot. Japanese culture seems to
Oh,
intertwine
yeah.
Christianity within a
Like
lot
with
of games.
I'm thinking of Final Fantasy and Shin Megami Tensei, I think.
Well, there's
And
one for sure. Xenogears, Xenosaga, those games.
and I think Bloodborne, because of the time, from playing it, it seems like it's taking place in the 1500s. During
There's
the
Bayonetta.
Bayonetta. No, I haven't played that.
Oh, okay. There's Dante's Inferno, but that's a Western game.
Don't video games in general kind of perpetuate a lot of stereotypes?
Yeah, they're all the same story tropes that you see.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Aside for those weird.
I forgot what I was saying, but I think it's because of the Lovecraftian influences. But Bloodborne vaguely deals with the corruption of the church. That's from the research hall, the Lady Maria figure, and also in the core story, because the main enemies in that series is called the Healing Church.
Yeah, that's weird. Japanese do tend to tackle more taboo topics. That's because they're not taboo in Japanese culture, but they are in the Western culture.
Well, and there's also a fascination. I mean, like the culture that is the farthest away from yours. I mean, in the same way that we're obsessed with Japan and fascinated by Japan, Japan is fascinated with the West. And, I mean, I think that what's interesting about that is that so much of it is people sensing what's missing in their own culture. Like, it's not a surprise to me that in the 1950s, the people who grew up in cookie cutter suburbia became obsessed with Indian mysticism, because that's the most holistic culture you can imagine.
Are you talking about the weird culture?
Yeah, I'm talking about the weird culture, like people like my mom who grew up in these super atomistic, super individualistic culture. And then what culture do the hippies become obsessed with? They become obsessed with the most holistic culture. So I think there's always like, who are we attracted to? And there is a big degree to which opposites attract, and we sense something in other people that we're missing and that we want and that we need. And that's on a deeply subconscious level, but it happens not only on the level of individuals but on the levels of whole societies.
Hunter, that reminded me.
Hunter, maybe you should unpack that weird acronym, because it's an awesome one and probably not everyone listening to this knows what that means.
Only if Dustin and Izzy unpack all the super specific jargon that they used when they were talking about video games. No, weird just stands for, it's from Joe Henrik, and it's his description of essentially the culture of university students and liberals. And it's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And part of the big problem with all these psych studies you see is that they are all done on this weird culture. And so the problem is that if you do all your psych studies on weird people, then you think you're observing human universals, but you're actually observing things of this particular culture. It's like, how good would your understanding of human nature be if you only studied French people? You'd conclude that all humans love cheese, don't see a particular problem with their president having many sexual affairs, and think that regardless of health regulations, we should all continue to smoke.
And then wear striped shirts and wear berets.
Yeah, and
that reminds me. Joe Henrik is cultural evolution, the Holy Trinity.
You think the French would have a problem with the president grabbing people by the pussy?
No.
I just think that a French person in general wouldn't do that. Like, that's not the mode of sexual expression. But like, that was part of the thing with when Bill Clinton had his affairs. The French were like so confused that America was so upset by this, when it was widely known that various French leaders had active mistresses during their time in power. But I think I don't know what I think mostly a French man would be like, you did what? Like, that's not how seduction works.
Yeah. They'd probably laugh it off, that French way of laughing. can't really do it too well.
Oh,
There you go.
Oh, better not grab them by the pussy. That is not.
oh. It's not the French
stop.
way. Anyway, but yeah, I would say so anyway, I just think, to Dusty's point, like it's always you can learn a lot about a culture by the culture that it's fascinated by, because in some sense there's something there that's missing. And I think that also, the other big set of cultures that the weirds have been fascinated by are honor cultures. And, in particular, since 9/11, there's always, during a time of war, there's a vilification of the other culture, and then like a weird covert fascination.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Southern culture and Middle Eastern. I'm painting brushes here, but that's what popped in my head.
Yep. And, I think also we just have to get comfortable with the fact that generalizations are general. Like, you don't apologize for the fact that a map of the world is low resolution. Like, it's deliberately low resolution so you can see the shapes of countries. But you also don't confuse it with an on the ground view. Like, it's not that a map of the world would tell you how to navigate the streets of Chicago.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's a generalization, but I mean, in the other honor culture that, weirds are fascinated by is that African American black redneck culture, because, it has everything that they lack. Like, their honor cultures are good at community. They take care of each other. They are allowed to express themselves, in terms of song and dance and all sorts of other things. And that's not what the weirds do. The weirds are super buttoned up, dancing in a cylinder, have no emotional expression. And they're like, man, those people have something that we don't. I mean, Thaddeus Russell talks about that pretty well, just the degree to which, white people are obsessed with black redneck culture because it's everything they don't have.
Is it part of the weird culture that, or I think it might have been a Victorian thing where they used to make sure that tablecloths would completely cover table legs because they were worried about men getting turned on by table legs?
Yep.
That's
weird.
a hilarious cultural thing.
Yeah, I mean, in general, the massive Victorian discomfort with sex of any form and anything that might set people off. But that's always, like, I think that's sort of a larger thing about, like, how do humans deal with sexual attraction? And, the long run trend is that historically, women's bodies had to be policed and covered up. And then increasingly, the locus of control lies not in women, but in men being responsible for managing their own sexual urges. I mean, like, there's all this, people get upset about the hijab or the burqa or anything like that. But, go look at what were the clothes that, women were wearing in the West. Like, they used to have to cover their hair with wimples, and there were those long dresses with the long sleeves.
What are wimples?
Wimples? Wimples are, the sort of things that, like, old medieval ladies wear, where their heads are covered. Kind of like what a mother superior would wear.
Oh, like
Like
the
a
thing that nuns wear?
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, women used to have to cover their hair, or Orthodox Jewish women wear wigs of fake hair, or the real hair wigs. So it looks like their hair is exposed, but it's not, because they're wearing a wig that is made of real hair that covers their real hair. Because apparently it's super weird, but it's one of those workarounds where, the hair, supposedly if a man sees exposed hair, like, he's just gonna lose all sexual abandon. Like, it's like whoever came up with these rules.
Hair.
It's the real Pantene Pro V thing. But then in practice, like of course women then want to expose their hair, so then the Orthodox Jewish thing is that they wear wigs that are made of real hair, but then they follow the rule that you have to cover your hair.
Gotta find loopholes.
Yeah, and humans always do. They always find loopholes around all these things. Like, actually, Dusty, were you and I talking about this in DC, or was I talking about this with Isaiah about the Japanese pornography laws in the 70s?
I think I might have been around for that conversation. I know they have to pixelate everything.
Well, so there were some laws they made, and so then out of that, because you couldn't have prostitution, they invented soap lands and pink lands. So soap land, you go and it's not prostitution, you just have a bath, and the masseuse rubs all your bits, and it's this like bizarre loophole workaround. And then the other one is they have what's called nopan shabu shabu. So it's shabu shabu, but with no pants. And the girls don't wear panties, and then all the floors of the cafeterias are mirrored, so you can look up their skirts. And
That's so weird.
of course it's weird, but it's like, these rules are made, and then people follow the rules, but then they find these workarounds around the rules. And I think Isaiah, it must have been Isaiah, was telling me that that's actually where tentacle porn originally came from, was because you couldn't show you had to have something penetrating the vagina, and it couldn't be a penis, so it was a tentacle.
Yeah, I was there for that part of the conversation.
So, hooray for human ingenuity, always finding ways to work around the rule and completely miss the point of the rule.
Well, it really doesn't matter now because the internet exists.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be very hard to police that.
I bet there are all kinds of different genres of tentacle porn.
Guaranteed.
Yeah, we're getting really sidetracked. I'm like, what have you guys been reading? Video games.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think that's the thing, like there's just like with any of this stuff, even, I mean, the original point was like cultures manifest themselves in whatever they do. And like clearly, so much of Japaneseness comes through in their games.
True.
Yeah, there's a particular fascination with Japanese culture from the West. I guess that's an example of weird culture taking an interest in honor culture.
Yeah, and in holistic culture, I mean, that's really the Japanese thing.
Yeah. And they like to blend things a lot too, like just mash stuff up. Like, for instance, Bleach it mashes up, what is it, like the ideas of a death god, and like soul reapers, people who take souls, and they mash up that concept with the Latino Day of the Dead, and they make a show out of it. It's like a lot of their content comes with mashing up cultural ideas. It's really interesting.
Well, that's that holistic mindset where you resolve apparent contradictions between things. And that's like there's a book on Japanese American fashion. I can't remember what the name of it is. It's really, really good, and it's basically like after World War II, what ended up happening was that the Japanese sort of were pretty down on their own culture because they felt like theirs was the loser culture because they lost World War II, and so they became obsessed with America and the West. And one of the big things they imported was Western culture in terms of clothing.
I know one thing. It's
what do you know?
The motorcycle gangs.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about those guys with the big
hair?
No. Yeah, the guys with the big old like Conan O'Brien dudes.
Oh, there's that for sure. Yeah.
They like dance in parks.
That makes for some pretty awesome manga, though. I'll say that.
Yeah, so the book's called Ame Torah, and it's all about, so basically they were like obsessed with preppy fashion, but what would happen is that so they started trying to dress prep, but then of course because they were Japanese, they tried to make sense of preppy clothing. So they came up with all these arbitrary rules about when you did a Windsor knot, when you wore this kind of cardigan, when you wore this. And then they went to the U.S. to these college campuses and would to interview these kids, and they're like, "Excuse me, you're dressing in all the wrong ways because you're not following these rules that we've confabulated." Um, and but I mean, essentially, what they did was they systematized American fashion and made it into a consistent rule system where they blended and mashed things up and figured out how they should fit together. And that's what that holistic mindset does well, is figure out how things fit together that shouldn't seem to fit together.
That reminds me, yeah, like a that reminds me.
Appropriation is good.
It's cultural appropriation is delicious.
Scrumptious.
So in PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 generation, a lot of Japanese developers were so. What this reminded me of with the whole when Japan was feeling down on their luck after World War II, I guess they had a bit of an inferiority moment, and it's in the gaming world. This kind of happened during Gen 7, so we're currently on Gen 8, and they were struggling a lot with their key franchises. So Final Fantasy 13 was controversial in that it was very linear, and a lot of people thought of it as they held the Final Fantasy series as like the key representatives of Japanese games. And a lot of games during this time period seemed either watered down or the Japanese developers were having a very hard time making their key franchises. They're either taking way too long to develop them or the product was just not as good as their Western counterparts. A really good example was the whole RPG phenomenon, because Final Fantasy wasn't the only one. And this is where the West really started kicking to high gear with games like Skyrim and the Witcher series, whereas the West, they were struggling with their key franchises like Final Fantasy, and a lot of other RPGs were basically in a sleep state. Also, certain fighting games like, granted, Street Fighter 4 came out, I think, in the middle of Gen 7, but even key Japanese fighting games were asleep for a little while. And I guess through trial and error, Japan were going through this struggle period. And oddly enough, it seems like they caught up again in Gen 8. And a lot of the really great games now seem like they're coming from Japan. So we got Zelda, we got Bloodborne, the Soul series. Fighting games are back again. So Tekken 7, Street Fighter 5, Guilty Gear series. And it seems like that's what it reminded me of when we're talking about cultural appropriation. They took on certain open-ended designs from the West and remixed it to their own. And I'm curious what will happen with China, because they recently started being a bit more open with game development, and I hope more massive regions follow suit, because the majority of games we're seeing are either from the West, specifically America and Europe, and Japan for the most part. But I want to see what China can cook up. I want to see, who knows, maybe we'll get a really good representative of an Islamic game from the Middle East. I'm just throwing that out there. I want to see a game from Africa basically, I want to see this medium start evolving to the next level.
Yeah, if we ever got an African game, it'd probably be from South Africa, I'm guessing.
You never know, actually, Dusty. I mean, there's a huge tech boom that's happening out of Kenya. I mean, in general, from what little I know, like, Kenya is probably doing better technologically than South Africa in terms of being innovative. So, but I mean,
good games from Russia. Like, what was interesting, it was not really this generation, but I think it would be Generation 7 where we're getting a couple out of Russia that were really interesting.
Well, and it seems to me like, from even what little I've played of Witcher, like, Witcher is Eastern European as fuck.
Yeah,
Yes.
I forgot where it's
Polish,
from. Is
right?
it Polish?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's amazing how much that culture, comes out. And I think part of what's exciting as well is, like, to Izzy's point, I mean, the automotive industry is a great example of this. Like, the Americans invented or sort of pioneered the mass manufacture and assembly line of cars. But it was the Japanese who perfected it and really harmonized it with the Toyota production system and Nissan and all these other companies, where they really said, okay, great, there are all these parts, but how do we get the parts to work together as effectively as possible? So I think part of what's going to be great, with the games and just in general, is all these cultures will, take on, as they take on the problems of, say, cars or games or whatever, they'll do certain things really, really well that others won't. And then as you get those things passed dynamically between each other as they're inspired, you're going to see a real positive evolution of everything.
Yes, I definitely agree. And on top of that, with the Japanese, coming back after them fluttering from the last generation, a lot of that too was just looking at what was successful and then trying to go with it. Because at the time, the Japanese were very much traditionalists in the way that they approached
yeah.
many of their things as far as like games went. But they had to break their tradition and just like have idea sex with the West to compete with their games for today. They did that with the actual game design as well as the business behind it. So instead of, building an engine from scratch for every game, they did what the Westerners were doing, which would be to license out a game engine and then use that engine for all their games instead of, putting all this man hour into every single game that they made, which would, cost them a lot of money. So there's a lot of stuff that they learned from the West, not just by design, but by the business sense as well.
And I'm curious what's gonna happen as time goes on, how the weird culture, for the most part, how they're going to look at other regions starting to make their own contributions. Like, I'll expect like initial, like, oh, these guys are so weird, ironically coming from the weird culture, and this is so foreign or whatever. And then
But I think the internet's going to make it super inevitable.
oh yeah, the
They're
whole
gonna
world's gonna
be
get
able to
globalized and
ignore
everything
anything
together.
anymore.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think you're already seeing a lot of the, I mean, there's always those two reactions, right? One is to get defensive and freak out and try and diminish what other people are doing, and then the people who do that are going to get bit on the ass because they're not going to evolve and they're not going to be able to compete. And then there are going to be people who are going to be curious and then want to have idea sex with that, and they will be the ones who innovate.
Exactly. Like, I remember, like, there was this Uncharted knockoff that was made. I think it's from the Middle East, and everyone was just trashing on it. It's, oh, it's basically a rip-off of Uncharted. But I'm curious, like, what if those developers or people around that region got better, tried more, like made their own interesting twist on whatever genre, and then come out with a much better product? How would that be received?
Well,
Yeah,
let me
there's
tell you
nothing wrong
something.
with knockoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, let me tell you something. All that Japan makes is cheap knockoff toys and budget transistor radios. Um, that's what everybody was saying in the 1950s. Turns out that, yeah, that's where they started, was making cheap, shitty knockoff shit. But look at where they are now.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time. And then I'll come back to the West, and then they'll have to innovate again. And it's just a continuous cycle.
Yep. And an upward cycle if we keep learning from each other, and a downward cycle if we
Forget
get
our history.
defensive.
Yeah.
If we get defensive and, get that, chauvinistic, not made here attitude.
Like the Western games started to rise during the PlayStation 2 era. And it's funny when you talk about knockoffs because the Japanese studios were dominating during the PlayStation and PlayStation 2 era. But, one of the big games for the West was God of War, which is actually a knockoff of a Japanese game called Rygar. But not a lot of people know that they were knocking each other off.
Essentially, yeah. And that's what beyond video games, when people look at other cultures as inferior, it's like, watch out, they might take on what the good aspects of your culture and then suddenly rise up, and now you'll have to imitate them, and it causes another upward cycle.
Yeah, and that sense of inferiority, either that sense of inferiority can lead to really shitty behavior in the sense that you just feel like you'll never be any good and you just sort of wallow in that, or that a sense of inferiority can like inspire you.
Uh-oh.
When Commodore Perry rolled into Tokyo Harbor with his giant black ships and, his cannons and everything else, the Japanese were like, fuck, like, we've been isolated for too long. We need to up our game. And they've been doing that for the last 150 years. So,
oddly enough, that's one of the things I have to unpack in the first part of the bell system for the Islamic one, because what I'm seeing right now with certain crowds is that exact same phenomenon. Oh, look at these Muslims, how inferior or backward their culture are. And it seems like the starting phase.
Well, but it's really understanding. I think, you see lots of great startups sort of lose their way as they become mature bureaucracies. And it's really understanding that the core spiritual climate of what makes any culture successful is the same. And, if your culture has had that spirit before, there's no reason why it can't recapture that.
Yeah.
Just look at Apple, right? Apple was a great company in the early 80s. It became a terrible fucking company. And then it recaptured that. And then, will it gain that? Will it lose that, or will it maintain that?
Oh, I have to see, because Apple is just a hardware company. So,
and to tie that into the games industry, you see these products like VR, and I'm wondering,
their software presence is very bad, though. Like, think of any Apple thing, like iTunes. Everybody hates iTunes. Like, that's pretty much the only cross-platform thing that they've made, and everybody universally hates it.
Have you guys tried any of the virtual reality stuff?
I bought a headset for my Edge 7. I've tried out a little bit of it, but I don't think my headset is that great. It was like a super cheap, like $3 headset, but I probably should have tried the Samsung headset, which I heard has a lot better quality.
Yeah, I have a friend who has like the full rig, like he does VR development or whatever, and he let me putz around in it, and it's pretty fucking staggering. I think they're gonna have like, there are obviously kinks, but there are kinks in any technology, and in the end, they work them out. So I think it's come a long, long way from back in the '90s when I tried it out in my cool hypercolor shirt.
Yeah, even just with a cell phone, it's progressed quite a bit because it's able to track your head movement pretty well. Like, it's pretty good with being able to sense what you're looking at and where your head's pointed. But yes.
What do you think of so I was thinking about what happened to comic books, and I think they're more wait, did they shift from comic books to graphic novels now? I think that's what they're called now.
They still have comic books.
Yeah.
Like, they're still called comic books. Like, typically a graphic novel is a collection of like issues that they put into one book, or even just a story.
Because I'm wondering,
something like Watchmen or 300, right?
Yeah, those are graphic novels.
Yeah.
Or Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm wondering, like, what would happen.
What's Mouse? I've never heard of that one.
Oh, Mouse is legendary. Like, there's, in terms of like sort of comic books that are graphic novels that, that sort of cross the line into high art, and that, the whatever kind of nerd I am feel comfortable reading, because it counts as a book. It's really like Mouse is the big one. So Mouse is basically the story. It's a retelling of World War II and the concentration camps, and all the Jews are mice, and then all the Nazis are cats. And it sort of blends like his father's retelling of his Holocaust experience. But it's kind of a big legendary one.
And I was thinking of so from comic books to graphic novels, what would happen to video games? Would they turn into like interactive mediums now, like in definition wise? And how far can we push that? I'm thinking of like blending it with education, have like a virtual museum or something. So, or basically,
That's a big thing now. Making virtual constructs. I see ads for that job all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the point. Is that I think the part of the one of the big problems of the imaginary line between education and entertainment is that you end up with like like even just what I said, right? Like comic books are generally classed as sort of entertainment or low art or whatever, right? Video games are the same thing, you know, to some extent movies. So essentially education, you've now like massively limited your toolkit. Like basically all that's available to you are books and plays. And so you're just, you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back, because you don't allow yourself to use these tools. And there are so many places you don't allow yourself to go. And, I think that it's all just content. It's all just media. And, we just have to get really comfortable with sort of the process that we've been talking about in this call, where maybe you use a game like Assassin's Creed or Tekken or, whatever, or Civilization 2 to sort of hook people's attention. And then ultimately you provide more and more materials for them to fall down the rabbit hole and learn more. And movies and TV shows can do this too. Like, if you watch a show like Vikings, you're like, man, this is amazing. Did that actually happen? And then you want to look it up.
Well, I think using historical fiction isn't a bad idea, right? Like when you're trying to, teach about history in general, to point at some historical fiction. Like if you think about it, games in some respect are historical fiction.
I mean, like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is like if you want to teach people about the Wars of the Roses and, the Mongols and a million other things, and not just the Mongols, like, in terms of those sort of nomadic peoples, like those are hardcore honor cultures. Like you're talking about like the Comanche. There's that great book, The Empire of the Summer Moon. You're talking about the Arabs, right? Like there's a lot of history that you can teach through Game of Thrones, and that's one of the things that I want to start to do with mixed mental arts is like, let's use Star Trek, let's use Game of Thrones, let's use all of this sort of stuff and connect it to the history so that it becomes easier for people. They've already fallen down the rabbit hole with whatever thing it is that they love. We just sort of have to like help them see what the next step is. Like you like Assassin's Creed, listen to History on Fire with Daniele Bolelli.
Yeah, one interesting thing too is like if you think of just like World War II, when you point to historical fiction like Saving Private Ryan, if you want to look at the Normandy storming scene, and then you can go even further, say, okay, the first mission in Call of Duty, et cetera, is the storming of Normandy, and then you could see, POV how it was like. How was the storming of Normandy like from the eyes of somebody that was there? So it's like there's so many different layers that you could use to teach historical events.
I wrote a blog not long ago that incorporates exactly that idea, called "The Russian Revolution is just as brutal as Game of Thrones."
Yep. Well, and I mean,
thought-
in
yeah.
general, Game of Thrones is what societies, like all societies without rule of law, that's how they operate. Like your primary concern in most of those societies is you're looking for stability. Like you could give a fuck about rule of law or anything like that. You just want someone who's strong enough to sit on the Iron Throne and hold the state together. And I mean, I think that's so much of the disconnect between America and the rest of the world on its foreign policy is that, they keep removing these fucking dictators rather than trying to progress the society to rule of law. Yeah, I mean, that's why there's that Arab saying, right? It's better to live one day, 1,000 years in tyranny than one day in anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Interventionism is cause a lot of problems.
Yeah. And I mean, these are the conversations we honestly need to be having. And like, the problem is that if you front door the conversation or like, great, we're going to talk about American foreign policy. Like,
Yeah, not gonna go well. There's plenty of boogeymen in the way, plenty of like scapegoats to target and brush the topic aside.
But if you're going to say we're going to have a conversation,
great for geopolitics too.
It's amazing. And like, if you're going to say like, let's have a conversation about Game of Thrones, you're like, awesome. And then you're going to say, and guess what? Like, this teaches you a lot about geopolitics. And you're like, awesome. And then you're going to be like, and now let's connect that to American foreign policy. And then you're like, what? So that's just in terms of that sort of, good game design, sort of getting people to that state of flow. Like, that's just good curriculum design. Like, Unit 1, Game of Thrones. Unit 2, Game of Thrones and geopolitics. Unit 3, Game of Thrones, geopolitics, and American foreign policy, and how we should rethink it. Like, now you've got a really good on-ramp.
Mm-hmm.
Unit 4, Japanese tentacle porn.
Well, that's one of the interesting things of the the Apple IIe is that there were a lot of actual good educational games on that thing.
Yep.
That everybody remembers. Like everybody remembers like Math Blasters and Oregon Trail and all, Carmen San Diego. Like, but it seems like nowadays I don't think kids have those same games or like those same tools that we may have had back then.
No, and it's the same thing as the movie industry. Like, it's much like, designing mindless entertainment is not that hard, right? Like, Transformers, right? We're going to blow a bunch of shit up and we're going to have Megan Fox wearing as little clothing as possible. Like, making, all due respect to Mr. Bay, but making a Michael Bay movie is comparatively easy, right? By the same token, designing stuff that is full of like substance and material and is like, full of facts and all of that sort of stuff, like writing one of these turgid academic books, it's not that fucking hard, right? Like, you just lay out all the facts, you lay out all the history, it's all there. But like designing something that really is like entertaining and educational without feeling like you're in tutorial mode for the first 4 levels, that's fucking hard. And that takes, that's real fucking skill. And that's the real challenge. Like, that's the work that we have to do.
There's a lot of struggle even today when game design for that. And I was gonna ask something from Dustin. What do you think of certain video games like trying to essentially imitate the film industry? Like, you see gameplay
I don't
being...
like it that much. I think there shouldn't be very much passive activity at all because that's not what a game is. Like, I admire them trying to show a story, but most of the successful games that do it right do it through environmental storytelling. Like, if you take a look at BioShock, you're never stopped and forced to watch a cutscene. Like, everything takes place within the environment of the game. But games that do stop. Like, as much as I love Metal Gear, Metal Gear has always had a problem with entrapping the player into like hour-long cutscenes, but they're doing nothing but watching like a miniature movie. Like, it's great and all, but I don't think it's the right path, because it's an interactive media. It's not a passive media where one just sits and watches. It's for someone who to participate in and to discover, to explore, to find out on their own. It's not supposed to be a movie. It's just supposed to be partly a challenge, partly an exploratory moment. It's for those who seek curiosity, curious individuals. And it's, trying to spark curiosity. I think games do a very good job of that, as opposed to like sitting on a screen and listening. Maybe you're engaged, maybe you're not. You might flip the channel, but a game forces you to act. It doesn't. You're not just sitting there and being passive.
Yeah, it's an active medium as opposed to films being passive. So in that
Yeah.
instance, trying to imitate it might not necessarily be a good thing.
And so then here's the question. Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
It depends on like the type of person you are and your interests too, though. Like, even though I'm not much of a gamer now, I generally, if they're good, like the cutscenes in video games, because I'm a huge fan of novels and movies and stuff like that. But I mean, if I wanted to focus more on actually playing the game and being more active rather than passive, then I wouldn't like them.
Yeah, the one thing about that though is that if you want to just watch the cutscenes, there are tons of YouTube channels that will string the story together through cutscenes in a video game. Like, you don't even need to own the game if you want to watch them. But there's no way to experience a game than by playing it. So you could always watch the cutscenes whenever you want, but having a active role in the game itself is the experience of the game.
I still think like it's a young medium, so it's still going through its growing pains moment, but it's already churned out some gems. But I can only imagine what will happen when it fully settles on an identity, and then I want to see what they churn out after that.
Some
Then
of
again,
the
I don't want it to fully settle as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is I don't know that any media ever fully settles. Like, there are the movie industry is still evolving in all sorts of interesting ways. The TV industry. I mean, you look at like TV, like people talk about the golden age of television. Like, shit happened in television in the last 15, 20 years that nobody, like Breaking Bad, The Wire, like there were all these iconic shows that utterly upended sort of the paradigm of what could be done with television, what was possible there. And the same thing with, the novel. Like, there are still plenty of people who are doing all sorts of crazy, interesting things with the novel. And some of them work, and some of them are sort of dead end experiments. But that's the evolutionary process. And I think, hopefully video gaming in the same way will continually evolve.
It keeps spiraling. I think the piece
Well, it's evolving very quickly.
Yeah, and I think people being more invested in PC gaming is kind of helping to speed that process along. There's a lot more. Go on.
Also from what Dustin has told me, it seems like the barriers to entry have really been lowered so that you can have people like the people behind Witcher.
Yeah, that's why it's evolving very quickly. Just like podcasting, anybody could do it nowadays. So it's not a barrier of entry that you would have had perhaps say 12 years ago, where you actually had to work for some AAA computer, like a company. You could do it on your own. You could form your own team, you can work on small ideas and implement them. They may not be big and flashy, but the core concepts of what you want to do will be there. But even now, independent teams are able to produce
indie
high
gaming.
quality content now, just from the evolution of tool sets that we have, just like
And some of
simplifying
them
the
like
process.
influence the AAA gaming industry as well. Like I
Yeah,
know,
they do cannibalize each other all the time.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that's been happening.
And so here's my big question for all of you guys, because a lot of what you've been talking about what great gaming is very much the experience that I would have wanted if I was coming to mixed mental arts as a total stranger. Like, how do we have it be this experience that, you know, is immersive? It's a choose your own adventure. Like, you get to explore in terms of the curiosity, and that it is an active experience, and that there isn't some fucking lame ass tutorial mode.
So I was thinking about this in terms of fighting games, basically trying. So one of the problems with this is most fighting games will just give you a massive wall of information. Say, here you go, take your time with this, dissect, and go play. Realistically, no one's going to ingest that much information so quickly. It has to be like a slow burn effect. And there was this episode it was a long time ago, by a YouTube channel called Extra Credits. They're amazing with this sort of stuff. I should plug in where I'm getting these things from. And they talked about how the main focus of fighting games is the competitive multiplayer aspect. So why not use the story mode, the single player story mode, as like a long, gradual process, like a safe zone of sorts to teach the player without explicitly throwing stuff at them, and teach them positive behavior. For example, doing a counter is really good because in lore, in single player, in game, you're gonna get extra points or whatever, or it's an easier time of beating certain characters that you can translate over to the competitive arena. But it seems like a much better idea than, here, let me front load this, give you a very watered down story mode, and then have at it. And you're not really selling the spirit of why these games are amazing, why people watch the Evo tournaments every year, why people get so invested in seeing two people virtually beat each other up, the underlying mechanics that's happening. It's the barrier of entry is really high. So you want to make your game as approachable as possible, and you want to teach the player without them feeling like, oh, I'm just being lectured. But I want to feel like it's me doing it, when in reality the designer's manipulating you in a positive way, stringing you along. And that's where the Super Mario Bros. Level 1 example I was giving. Another game that does that really well is Portal. It's one of the best tutorials of recent time, and it hardly uses any explicit, this is how you move a buck, this is how a portal works. No, you just do it and you figure it out right there and then. The way the camera is positioned, the way certain key viewpoints that attract your eyes, they know the player will naturally gravitate towards those attractions, and they can almost predict what the player will do, and then the player will have the illusion that, oh, I discovered this, when in reality the developer needed you to discover that, and you're learning without being lectured at.
But the emotional experience of feeling that you discovered it is obviously infinitely superior to feeling like, oh,
and then this happened, and then you do this, and blah blah blah. And I think that's a key strength of video games, and I'd like to see what would happen if you mixed education with that. If kids didn't feel bored, oh, here we go, we're learning more maths, and it's all so boring. But instead, you think of maths as almost like a language, and these mathematical tools as tools to use and discover things. Why people like physicists are using mathematical principles, and what are they actually gaining from this process, why it's so attractive, the idea of measuring things at a smaller scale, making technological processes. Like, you want to try and give these kids the allure, the appeal of such a thing instead of a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper.
Yeah,
Well, I
that was
think
one of my biggest problems too, just learning, not a problem so to speak, but like when I was going through calculus, etc. Like, they teach you everything, but they don't tell you what it's for until you get a word problem like on the back of your homework. And that's when you discover,
Yeah.
oh, this is why we learned this thing. But they don't tell you like up front the application of what you're learning or what it's useful for. And I think they should probably scoot that up to the forefront rather than hide it in the back in a word problem.
Well, I mean, it's like, there's this basic 3-step, right? Problem, promise, process, right? And like never especially in math is especially bad for this. Never in math do you get a sense of what is the problem that you're trying to solve. Like, why is this a useful toolkit? Like, why would I need to think in terms of variables? And
That's
then,
why I was never interested in it in school.
yeah, because
I liked
it
it
wasn't.
because it's hard to be wrong. Like, you didn't have to think that much.
Well, and you could, I mean, it was hard to be wrong, and then, on top of that, like, it was super clear cut, and then you could, like, your teacher, there was nothing subjective about it with your teacher.
Yeah. It's like, it's not you like knowing the nuance of like metaphors and things. It was just like 1 + 1. Yes. And you could check your work and all that and know if you're correct or not.
But I think what's interesting is that, what Andrew's saying versus what we're saying, Dusty, is it was the emotional experience of this, like how he experienced the gameplay design.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bad teacher and a good calculus teacher and a bad calculus teacher, night and day. I've had both. Like, I couldn't stay awake during the bad calculus teacher's class. It was just like impossible for me to do so.
Izzy, what you were saying made me think that, what you guys are talking about with the mindset you have towards a good video game, that seems to me like a good approach to take towards life in general. Like, choose your own adventure, work towards solving problems and building skills, and use your own personal power and confidence to help fuel you to accomplish goals and achieve your dreams, and work together. Use your social intelligence to work together with your friends cooperatively to achieve goals.
Mm-hmm.
Spot
I
on,
think the
Andrew.
biggest overall concept is to push others towards self-discovery rather than forced discovery. So let people discover things on their own instead of pushing something like very forcefully onto them.
That's why immersive sims are becoming so attractive. Like Zelda Breath of the Wild pretty much encapsulates that. So you want to fight the final boss, go right ahead. Good chances are you're going to get annihilated for it. So if you do, you can go and engage in that self-discovery at your own pace without explicitly. I don't think it has a difficulty setting. I could be wrong on that. But
No, I
yeah,
don't
it
think it does.
doesn't. So it's very Dark Souls-esque in a way. So it's like, go out there, self-discover, gain your toolkits, now go solve this giant problem that you had in the beginning.
Yeah, if it were up to me, I would ban difficulty settings.
Right there with you. I
Well,
don't like difficulty settings either.
Yeah,
Dusty, I'm getting a tweet from President Trump right now saying that he has decided to ban difficulty settings. So I think you've had a real impact.
Oh God.
Well, I would say,
I don't want to go down that.
yeah, no difficulty settings.
Yeah, it's
what
a
were you
bit.
going to say, Andrew? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, what Dusty was just saying. It just reminded me that, it's about like arousing someone's creativity and allowing them, like you were saying, Hunter, to fall down rabbit holes by arousing their creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I think these are all good design principles. Like, you know, everything that we've talked about in terms of the experience, you know, that we want. I mean, this is just like, this is really like, this is how actual education works. Like, not the crap that is mostly passed off as education. And you know, the more we're intentional about designing that experience, the more we will, you know, criticize what's done poorly by creating something that's much, much better. So I would love for us to, like, this is all good theory, and then I would love to maybe have a future conversation, either on this chat or off chat, about how we can put all this theory into practice and all the things that we're doing.
Yeah, we kind of went all over
I
the place.
already try to do that.
Linking a lot of ideas together.
Yes. If you all boil it down, like all video games are, or the good ones are, allowing people to creatively problem solve.
I want to see, I guess I want Tekken to do this, but I want to see a fighting game be very faithful to martial arts and like kind of draw people into that, and then have a chain effect where teach the virtues of competition. So sports competition in the real world with martial arts, then virtual competition. And I think Tekken would be the best candidate for that, and Virtual Fighter, but that's been dormant for a while. It has. I'd like it to be a series that's grounded for that to work. So, oh, this guy's doing Kyokushin karate. I want to go pick that up. This person's doing boxing. I want to go pick that up.
That
What
might be a
about,
good,
like, the UFC games.
Yeah, they do have the UFC games as well. I've never played
Like,
any of them, but I heard
yeah.
they're pretty
Bleh.
yeah, they're pretty simulatory.
Like, you wouldn't really see. I could be wrong, but you wouldn't really see UFC and an Evo championship.
No.
I don't think anyone wants to watch that.
Well, it's because it's a simulator.
Yeah.
Like all Evo's arcade style.
Yeah.
There's not really any simulation type games in there.
I wonder what would happen if they kind of flared up a simulator, maybe blend a couple
guys, I have
elements of that
to
in.
duck out.
I think we're reaching the end anyway, so I think
Yes. I think we're all tuckered out
Yeah.
with the video game chat. But
I don't know.
thank you guys very much for jumping on here tonight.
So Hunter, Darkest Dungeon, and everyone else, play Dark Souls 1 Remaster when it's coming out. I think that encapsulates the whole heart of what we were talking about.
I already know Dark Souls 1. If they didn't fix Blight Town, I ain't playing it.
Play it again. I'll play online with you. Oh no, you're on an Xbox. Damn it.
No, I have a PC as well.
Okay. Well, on that note, you want to say the goodbyes, Hunter?
I think Dusty will take us out.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Izzy, Andrew, and Hunter. Just to let you know, we will be doing another chat next week. I do not have the calendar up at this moment, but I believe it is something cool, and I will post it. I think it's Evolution. Well, anyway, yeah, I think it's Evolution. Yeah, I think the next one is. I think the next one is Evolution, actually. So there's probably going to be a ton of people coming on. So that's our next chat for next week. We also have our Reddit group where we announce the chats, and the Facebook group as well. Got a great Patreon with some really nice exclusives if you want to check that out. And if you ever just want to hop on our Facebook chat and you want to chat with us, just like in a very idea sexy fashion, that's where a lot of us actually hang out. So please visit our website, which is mixedmetalarts.online. Another way you can help us out while not actually like spending any money that you're not, say you don't want to donate something, but you want to help us out. Say you're an Amazon shopper and you love this shop on Amazon. We got affiliate link there. Just click that link, do your Amazon shopping, and that actually helps us out. So try that link out and help us out that way as well. All right, Hunter, was there any last things you needed to say?
And also at the bottom of that page where you can find that affiliate link, you can also find t-shirts if you want to buy t-shirts, and that will also help us out.
Yes.
I just got an awesome one for Christmas.
Great. You'll have to wear it on one of the chats one of these times.
I will. Maybe I will wear it for the next one.
Sweet.
Evolution. Woo!
Yeah.
Evolution. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for joining. Had a great time talking video games with you all, and have a good night.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone for a great conversation. It was awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Adios.
MMA out.